Morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to the regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting for June 9th, 2016. If you would, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Ms. Knapp, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, good morning. There is one. Plan Amendment 1601, Ordinance 1607, which is the Urban Cores Plan Amendment. There is a public comment letter attached to your updated memo. This concludes the changes.
Thank you very much. Ms. Schenk, any input prior to the
No changes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next item on the agenda are try that again, let me reset. The minutes for the meeting of May 12th.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Rhodes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of May 12, 2016.
Thank you very much. There's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a second. Chair will call the matter to the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye, passes unanimously. All right, we're going to move on to the citizen comments. This is an opportunity for anybody in the audience who wishes to speak on anything that's not part of the agenda to come forward. Is there anybody that would like to speak on anything not part of the current agenda? If you would like to speak on something that is on the agenda, of course, you'll have an opportunity a little bit later in the process. So, seeing nobody come forward, we're going to close public comments. And the clerk office is going to establish the rules of the hearing. So, if you would, please go ahead and this is when you're going to be sworn in. If you're going to speak today, if you would, please rise and be sworn in.
Rules first.
Yeah, well,
The applicant is entitled to 15 minutes for presentation and 5 minutes for rebuttal. Individuals may speak for 3 minutes, and anyone representing a group or organization of 5 or more members may speak for 10 minutes. If you represent a group, please state the group you represent and provide written authority to speak on behalf of the group. When you step to the podium, please state your name. You have been sworn. Please raise your right hand. You swear or affirm that the factual statements and factual representations which you're about to present at this meeting will be truthful and accurate. Thank you.
thank you very much. All right, we're going to move on to the consent agenda. The first item, number 2, Tough Holdings. Ms. Knapp, would you please read that item into the record?
Yes, Z1602, Tough Holdings LLC rezone. This is a rezone of approximately 0.9 acres located at 3010 53rd Avenue East, from professional small to general commercial zoning with a maximum non-residential square footage of 9,692 square feet.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to come forward and speak on this item? That would be your time. Okay, seeing nobody step forward on this item, we're going to close the public comment portion. And let me see. Ms. Knapp, could you please read item? Well, before that, are there any comments from any of the commissioners on item 2? Okay, thank you. Ms. Knapp, could you please read item 3 into the record?
Yes. Z1603, Gettle Automotive, Inc., Gettle Toyota Dealership Parking Lot. This is a rezone of approximately 3.8 acres located on the east side of 14th Street West, south of 63rd Avenue West, from RDD 6 to General Commercial Zoning District.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to come forward and speak on item number 3, Gettle Automotive? Okay, if you would, please step up to the podium, state your name and that you have been sworn. And you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay, my name is Robert Van Buren, and I live.
And you've been sworn?
Yeah,
Okay,
I live right on the backside of where they're planning this parking lot, And my biggest concern, I have a lot of concerns, but my biggest concern is if they pour a bunch of concrete right on my backyard, basically, it's going to flood my whole house out. I already have drainage problems back there, and if I have all this cement, and I'm sure they're going to build it up, it's going to just flood me out, and I'll lose my home that I've been in for 16 years. It was kind of a crude map that they drew and sent to us. Another concern I have is there's a pond on this property, and it doesn't even show the pond that Gettel's map has, and I don't know what they're going to do with that. Also, my privacy is going to be, there's going to be a bunch of people working on cars right in my backyard. My property value, it's going to be probably lit up all night, and all the animals that are going to get driven out of that. It's basically a forest right now, and I don't know where all the animals are going to go. They're going to come right to my house, rats and coons and possums. I have photos here showing my backyard this morning after yesterday's rain, and it's within 25 feet of my house right now. And then our street, it actually comes through the side of my neighbor's house and floods the street too. So not just me is going to be affected if they try to put this thing in. I guess that's about all. And what kind of a fence they're going to put up there, I don't know if I'm going to be seeing cars all day. It was an open field for years and years, and now they want to put a bunch of concrete and metal and stuff in there. So I'm totally opposed to this.
Thank you. And if you want to enter your photos into the record, if you would give them to the clerk's office, and those would become part of the public record. And just for clarification, this is an opportunity for the citizens to make a comment and to provide testimony in the public hearing. If appropriate, we'll provide some responses or ask staff to provide some responses to your concerns.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, I've got a couple other cards to speaker card signed up for item number 3. Sir, your name was Robert Van Buren? Is that okay? All right, got that. And the next card I have is Renee Lord. If you would please step up, state your name, and that you have been sworn.
Renee Lord, and I've been sworn. And I live behind where they said they're going to build the thing, and my concern, of course, is the drainage, the lights, and if they're going to put a gate up or a wall up, or exactly what they're going to do, because none of that was told to us. So, and then, of course, the nature back in the back, and the trees and all that stuff. I was wondering what's going to happen with all of that. Okay?
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, the next speaker card I have is Mary Jane Bean. At a 50-50 chance. If you would, please state your name and that you have been sworn.
Good morning. I'm Mary Jane Bean, and I've been sworn.
Thank you.
I live adjacent to Van Buren and Lord. I live right next door, and I'm the first property showing affected on the map that Gettel Toyota sent. When I purchased it just over 5 years ago, one of the appealing things was the open field behind it. It's one of the last open green spaces in the vicinity. There's a lot of wildlife back there, a lot of egrets and herons, hawks, owls, a whole family of raccoons, possums, which doesn't really have any place else to go. I'm also concerned about decrease in property values since this will be located so close to our backyards. Our backyards are already small. The parking lot, depending on the any kind of barrier, could end up as close to 15 to 20 feet from my bedroom. Now, I'm not sure if this is just a parking lot or if this is actually going to be a place where they're going to extend their workshop and be working on cars right there behind our houses, or is it just a parking lot? That's one of my questions, because that makes a big difference. If it's just a parking lot, we've got people coming and going from the parking lot all day, driving, slamming car doors. If it's a repair shop, we've got a lot other noise that's going to be going on real close to our homes. Also, I'm concerned about lights that might be on all night. And I really don't want it to be rezoned at all. I do oppose the rezoning. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else in the audience who wishes to come forward and make a statement regarding this project? Anyone? Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the public hearing portion of the hearing. There've been a couple issues raised. They're not uncommon in the rezoning process, so maybe if we could get some clarification from staff. Mr. Gerstenberger, with regard to the stormwater management concerns, can you confirm that this project will be required to minimize any impacts to the neighbors, and explain how that would be done, please?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to, but unfortunately, I missed swearing in first thing this
Okay,
morning, so.
that's it. You got to stay after. If you would, please rise. And this is another opportunity if you've not been sworn.
You swear or affirm that the factual statements and factual representations you are about to present will be truthful and accurate?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, with respect to not only the proposed rezone, but the existing dealership, there has been a history of work that has been done as far as the stormwater system, as far as the outfall system, which basically leads from the Ghetto Toyota dealership and heads east into one of the major tributaries of Foley's Creek, which happens to be Pittsburgh Drain. That particular outfall system, not too long ago, I would say, give or take somewhere around 5 years ago, was totally replaced. The outfall system happened to be corrugated metal pipe, which is very likelihood in this particular area to rot out or rust out after a given number of years. So that particular outfall system was actually replaced not too long ago, and in part with the replacement of that culvert system, the Ghetto dealership had negotiated and had worked with the county to not only replace that system, but also to provide necessary easements for future maintenance of that particular system. With respect to any future development of the rezone parcel or any other vacant lands associated or adjacent to this project, the project would be required to provide stormwater facilities to treat and attenuate any runoff from additional impervious areas.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. And a follow-up question. I think Mr. Van Buren mentioned that he's currently having flooding on his property. I think typically the expectation is that if it, with regard to neighbors, that the development's not going to fix any flooding issues that currently exist in a vacant condition, but the goal is to collect all water generated from the new project and avoid impacting their neighbors.
Mr. Chair, that is correct. With any proposed development associated with this project, the property itself, the paved areas, the impervious areas would be routed or graded to drain into the proposed stormwater facilities for treatment and attenuation before discharge into the outfall systems.
Okay, thank you. All right. There was also a concern brought up regarding lighting. I didn't see any plans associated with the rezone package. That detail is typically worked out during the construction plan review. Is that, could somebody on staff maybe speak to the issue with regard to lighting and what criteria might have to be implemented in order to provide some assurance to the folks that they're not going to have lights on neighboring property all night.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
Margaret Tusing, I'm the planner for this project, and I have been sworn. I would like to show the aerial and try to explain exactly what is happening with the property. The area in blue is the area that is being proposed to be rezoned. Approximately this portion of the site is going to be what is the parking lot. Okay? The rest of it is going to be retention pond for the facility that will be, adjacent to 14th Street. Staff recommended that they include this portion as a square, as a rectangle, so that if during the design of their project they needed a bit more space, they wouldn't have to come back and ask for the rezoning. But the primary portion of it is going to be retention pond. The north half will be where the parking facility is. The applicant is here, and they will speak to lighting. They're not proposing for this parking facility to be lighted because they can explain to you what it is. This project also requires a special permit that is, will happen after the rezoning takes place, as well as a site plan review. So those things are in the system right now,
Okay,
awaiting the approval of the zoning if it happens.
okay.
And Mr. McGuire is here representing the client, the
We're
applicant.
still in consent. I'd just like to give commissioners an opportunity, if they wish to hear more on this, to pull this from consent and have testimony. Okay. All right. There's been a suggestion or a request from a commissioner to pull this from consent so we can get additional testimony. We'll have an abbreviated presentation, but we're pulling it from the consent agenda. So with that being the case, there are no other consent items, so for clarification, item 3 is being pulled from consent. We're going to leave item 2 on consent, and Chair will entertain a motion regarding the consent agenda, item 2.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Mr. Horgan made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. DeLesline made the second. Is there any discussion on consent? Seeing none, we're going to call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion on the consent agenda passes unanimously. Okay, little help here. How do we, since we've already had some testimony, do we need to reopen this item?
Yes, when you hear it.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so we're gonna consider item number 3. And Ms. Knapp, could you please read that item into the record again, please?
Okay. Z1603, Gettle Automotive, Inc., Gettle Toyota Dealership Parking Lot. A rezone of approximately 3.8 acres located on the east side of 14th Street West and south of 63rd Avenue West from RDD 6 to General Commercial Zoning District.
Okay, and then to be perfectly in line with the rules, we're going to open the item up for public comment again. If there's anybody else, or anybody who wishes to make a comment, if you would, please step forward, state your name and that you have been sworn. We've already heard 3 comments, so we'll be, again, specifically addressing some of the concerns mentioned, but is there anybody else who wishes to come forward? Seeing nobody, we're going to close the public hearing portion of the hearing. Ms. Tusing. You previously put a graphic on the overhead, and if you could you please, again, place that on the overhead?
Yes. This is the portion that is in blue is the portion of the property that is being requested to be rezoned. The north portion of the property, and perhaps the applicant knows the acreage, that will be the portion of the parking lot. The remaining portion of the property, Gettle owns all of this property as well, will be a retention pond, and the northern portion of the property is where the parking facility will be. This zoning does restrict the use to a parking facility only. And as I said, they have submitted plans for their special permit. So we do have the plans in, and that is exactly what they show.
Okay, but those plans, they're not associated with the rezone, that's part of the
No,
concern?
they're not.
Okay,
This
thank
is a
you.
straight rezone, so there are no site plans.
Okay.
But Mr. McGuire is here representing the Gettle Toyota.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to ask that the applicant make a presentation, and if you would, please tailor your presentation to the concerns of the neighbors.
Good morning. My name is Hugh McGuire. I'm here representing Gettle Toyota, or Gettle Automotive, Inc.
Mr.
I
McGuire,
have with me Bob Bisplinghoff representing,
Mr. McGuire, you've been sworn, haven't you?
sir, I'm sorry, I have been
Thank you.
sworn. First of all, we appreciate the cooperation we've received from staff in reviewing this in a timely manner. This is a fast-track project, so designated by Manatee County. And I realize that this is not part of this hearing, but this is part of a project. This will be a new rebuilt Toyota facility. This is only part of it. The existing facility will be, a new facility will be added immediately north and on the Gettle property, immediately north of the Toyota sales area. And will extend up to the ABC property line, liquor store. We have heard these requests, these comments. This is 3.888 acres. As they said, the property is currently vacant. Ms. Tucson has shown you the part that we intend to put a parking lot in. There will be no lighting. This is for storage of new cars, cars that have been there. There's not going to be a building on it. There's not going to be any repair work on that property. It's a parking lot. We just need it as an auxiliary. As she said, there's going to be a very large retention area. We don't have it on this plan because it's not before you. It is in the process in the county right now being reviewed. And that's going to be a large retention area back there for the whole facility. And that will be immediately behind where these folks are talking about. So I've tried to address your question. The only access to this lot is through the Gettle property. It's immediately behind the Toyota sales building. So if you have any questions, we'd be glad to answer them. And I'll save you the rest of my presentation since you asked me to just comment on these items.
Thank you, sir.
And if you have questions, we're ready to answer them.
Yes, are there any questions, Mr. Rutledge?
What about the animals? And I don't know how this is addressed in the thought relating to the zoning, but I'm just curious, is there a thought in your analysis, because you sound like you're far along, is there a design such that the animals can move back and forth from other properties? I mean, is there any thought to that? That's my question.
Mr. Rutledge, if you look at the aerial, do you have can we have you've got a good one. One over there. If you look at the treed areas, see the area in blue? That's the area that we're requesting to be rezoned. Approximately the northern third of that is what we're talking about. There's currently an existing pond right behind the sales building. If you see the sales building, this is the current Toyota sales. This is another current building, but that's currently a pond. This area back in here will be turned into a very large retention area. And that is to furnish the retention for the entire facility. So that's in the process. It's not before us, and I don't think Ms. Schenck wants me to talk about it, but that's where we're going. Okay. But the county has that application right now. I think it was submitted 2 weeks ago. Anybody else have any questions?
I think more specifically, typically with regard to developments that have habitat that's considered critical, the county many times requires listed species surveys. Has that been a requirement on
No,
this?
sir.
Okay.
If you see, I mean, if you look at this, all due respect,
Yeah.
if you look at where we're talking about, how many trees are there, okay? I mean, you've got retention, you got a pond that probably is not a very high-quality pond, okay? You've had an agricultural type area back there. You see that there's very few trees. The trees are really up further north behind that, behind this area right in here. You see the trees in there between that and other uses. And that's the reason we felt, you know, fairly comfortable, because there's a good barrier there. There will be, there will be landscaping according to the code, and, it's not going to be paving the entire 3.88 acres. It's just the northern part of the parking lot.
Thank you.
Mr. McGuire,
Yes,
just
sir.
following up on that, because it is, I think, a little misnomer when they're saying that the ghetto is going to be using this property for a parking lot.
Yes, sir.
Can you just show us using your pen on this particular diagram? You said that the parking lot was going to be at the north. Can you
Right.
just delineate a little about where that's going to be, or ending?
Right about in here,
Okay.
somewhere in here, this area in here.
Thank you.
And all of this is currently zoned. All of this area in here is already zoned. I mean, that will be part of the overall facility, but does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Horgan.
Yes, I have one question. During the public comment, there was concern that it was going to be right up against people's property line, and I don't see any residential properties that are close to this. Is that
Well,
correct?
I think, if you look at the 3.888 acres, okay, then you get down, as the blue line shows, down next to the properties across the bottom.
Okay.
But as I have said, we're not paving that part, and as Ms. Tusing has said, that's going to be retention down in that area. So, I'm not saying that the retention is going to solve any problems with drainage. As you said, when someone comes in, they're not necessarily burdened to fix drainage areas that exist in other parts of the area, but, I mean, it's going to be a very, very large retention area.
That was my point, that there is not going to be paved up to
No,
those
sir.
properties.
I think some of the issue is that this is a straight zoning. It doesn't travel with a general development.
That's right, that's it.
That details work
And of
out.
course, there are no stipulations with a straight rezone, so.
Was there any other questions? Mr. Rutledge?
I just had one more question, Thomas, if, Mr. Gilsey, excuse me. Whether the improvement in the piping that you described expanded the capacity there and spoke to some of the drainage issues? I mean, was that part of the thing, or was it just replacement of existing? We have this 36-inch culvert.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Rutledge, I'm not trying to recall back exactly if we were replacing pipe by pipe, but specifically to go from, say, corrugated metal pipe, which has got a lot of undulations and a higher, Mr. Connolly could shed a little bit of light on us too, as far as me speaking of like friction factors, things of that sort. Corrugated metal pipe has higher friction factors per se than, say, what was used to replace that particular system, which was reinforced concrete pipe, which is a lot smoother wall. So just going from 36-inch corrugated metal to 36-inch RCP, you're actually picking up capacity just based on material alone, let alone going from a 36 to, say, a 42 or a 48-inch pipe. But specifically, I can't recall whether or not we did some pipe upsizing. And the possibility exists that we might have upsized in particular areas, but as a whole, the whole pipe system from the dealership over to, I believe it was 5th Street West, was replaced from corrugated metal pipe to RCP.
And again, for the record, that improvement was conducted because the existing pipe is probably collapsed, failed.
Correct.
Areas, so
Yes, sir.
just replacing it with like kind would be a benefit.
Correct.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Horgan.
on that subject, Mr. Kritzenberger, typically, we require that there be no runoff onto adjacent properties, that all of the water be retained on site. So it could, it may be the case that some of the problems that are existing on neighboring properties are because there is no, some of it's running off of this property onto them, and by containing everything on site, that might help some of the other situations. Okay.
Commissioner, if I could just opine, Commissioner Horgan, that would be correct, particularly with respect from like an existing condition to a post-condition. And post-condition, the site would have to be graded as such to where you're collecting the impervious areas, you're collecting the runoff from the pavement and directing it into a stormwater facility, and a little bit flowing directly to what basically would be the existing outfall system, which is right along the back of those properties along 65th Avenue.
And again, for clarification, I know Thomas and I both understand, but for the benefit of the audience and the commissioners, you can't cut off somebody's, if there's water flowing onto their site and it's beneficial, like for instance, a wetland, you can't starve that. You have to maintain historic flow patterns. But typically, when you attenuate in a pond, you hold the water in the pond, it does alleviate many of those conditions. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Bauer.
just one quick question. The property adjacent to the east that Gettle owns, any plans for that property that's abutting more against a lot more homes?
Retention. Are you talking about
The dog leg, right?
Just the area of property, I believe,
Here?
you said, yes, sir.
That's retention. That will all be retention. It's going to be a huge retention area.
And
You have to, because and I don't want to get into it, okay, Ms. Schenk, if you'll allow me. This property will extend further north, because if you know where the old bingo hall is, that will be taken down. That will be part of the facility. This building will remain, okay, but there will be a new Toyota dealership installed here, and the property will go north to the ABC liquor store, which will encompass the bingo hall, and that will be taken down. That's the reason we need the parking. It's just going to be a larger facility. But the only entrance is through the Gettle property. You can't get to this property otherwise. Excuse me.
Mr. McGuire, I think maybe the question may arise because that property is not part of the rezone. And is it not part of the rezone because stormwater is an allowed use in that zoning, and the other property is being?
Mr. Chairman, this is designed this way because the county asked us to design this, okay, to put the whole thing.
Yes, sir.
All we needed was probably, as I said, the northern third.
Right.
But they asked us to go ahead and take in this whole parcel all the way down to right here.
I'm referring to the square parcel. The reason that's not included in the rezone is because it's stormwater.
Right.
And it has a problem.
And that will be cut, that's in the county. That's the process of the bigger facility.
So this, the zoning application is tailored for the parking, not for the
Yes,
stormwater.
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Are there any other questions? I have just one question, or maybe staff can clarify. Typically, when we do a zoning, it's a plan development and has a lot of information that travels with it. This is a straight zoning. Could somebody please speak to the buffering that's typically required with regard to a straight zoning?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, Joel Christian. For the record, I've been sworn. The standard zoning district or the standard buffers between general commercial and residential development is 15 feet. Includes trees and shrubs. Typically, there's an option for a fence at the developer's option. If there is a fence or wall, that's placed on the project side of the buffer, so the vegetation is to the benefit of the neighbors. That's the general requirement, or the requirement for general commercial adjacent to residential, and that would apply on this parcel.
Okay, thank you. And then a follow-up question, Mr. McGuire. This is a straight zoning. It has no conditions or stipulations. With regard to the intent of the owner, is the intent to provide a wall or a fence?
I think that's going to depend probably upon what the county wants us to do. I mean, as you just said, a straight rezone, The only issue with this one that makes this different, generally a straight rezone, there's no stipulations can be attached. But in this case, we have agreed that this will be used only as a parking lot, okay? So in that situation, we have talked about the possibilities, but, basically it's landscaping because as you can see, it's not really, the area we're talking about is up here and then there's going to be retention south of us.
Yes, sir.
A large area, so.
But and again, for the neighbors, there is a consideration of buffers that's required, and then the option for fencing, so, thank you.
If I may, I don't know if I explained completely, Margaret Tusing with Building and Development Services. The use of a car dealership requires a special permit, which is a public hearing in front of a hearing officer. So this site will be going back for a special permit approval. And so at that time, some of the issues that might be of concern to the neighbors can be addressed through that public hearing process.
Okay, all right, thank you, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. All right, I don't think we need any rebuttal or closing comments. I think we're pretty clear on what the issues are. The chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Rhodes.
I'll make a motion on item number 3. Based on the staff report, the evidence presented, comments made at the public hearing, and finding the request to be consistent with the Manatee County Comprehensive Plan, Manatee County Land Development Code, with the finding of consistency that limits the uses of the parcel to a parking facility with associated landscape buffers, stormwater facilities to serve the commercial use of the contiguous parcels on the west of the rezoned site. I move to recommend adoption of the Manatee County zoning ordinance number Z16-03 as recommended by staff.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Gillespie, second. Chair is going to call this matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye, passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to item number 4, I believe. Let me get back to my agenda. And item 4 was on the regular agenda. This is sorry, it doesn't say. This is legislative or just information?
Item 4 is a public hearing on amendment to the Land Development Code.
Okay,
Legislative.
legislative. Okay,
You have
thank
to open
you.
the public hearing.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Knapp, could you please read item number 4 into the record?
Yes. Ordinance 1632, which is amending Code of Ordinance related to school impact fees. An ordinance regarding educational facilities amending the Code of Ordinances to remove the requirement that educational facility impact fees remain at 50% of the maximum allowable rate if the electors of Manatee County approve a half-cent sales tax surtax to fund school construction.
Thank you very much. All right. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Dan Slant, Deputy County Administrator. Back in December of last year, you had an item that came before you for the reimposition of a educational facility, or otherwise known as a school impact fee. This was done at the request of the school board. They did that through a resolution where they made that request. And I think, as you know, the school board does not have a land use process of their own. So although that imposition of an impact fee is important to them in terms of how they finance and pay for the construction of facilities and the repair and renovation of their facilities, they have to go through the county so that the county has to impose those fees for them to be able to collect them. So that was done at the request of the school board. As one of the provisions when that was reimposed, they provided for a gradual increase in the impact fee over time. It began at 50% that became effective as of May 18th of this year, rising a year later to 75% of the maximum amount that could be imposed for the impact fee, and then a year later going to the full 100%. They also had a provision in there that provided a condition that if the electors of Manatee County voted to approve a sales tax referendum to finance school construction activities, that impact fee, instead of rising in that gradual manner, would remain at 50%. The school board has subsequently had a number of deliberations about that last condition, and has requested by resolution that particular condition, that it remain at 50% if a sales tax referendum is approved, be removed from the ordinance. And so, based on that request, we are bringing this item forward to the Planning Commission, and then would take it to the Board of County Commissioners to approve that. And I believe, from our point of view, this is consistent with the comprehensive plan and in accordance with the LDC, and we would recommend that that change be made.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I have just I know this, we've heard this before, and there was, I believe, some comments made. I think it might have been somebody from the school board that says the money collected with regard to impact fees has to be spent in a certain period of time. And if it's not spent, it creates a problem for the school board. Is that correct?
That's correct. There are provisions in the ordinance that would require that they be spent in a particular period of time. If not spent, there are provisions that could be a request for refunds because those monies were not spent. So
That becomes very problematic for the school board at that point?
extremely problematic, yes, sir.
And is that the impetus of the requirement to keep the, at the 50% rate if a sales tax is included?
In terms of the deliberations that the school board made, there could be a lot of reasons why they made this request to do this. I do not know all the reasons why they chose to do this. It could be a factor in their thought processes, but I cannot comment as to
That could be
why
a
they did
factor,
it.
so I'm not asking you to testify for the school board. I just, as an observer, you're in the details, so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Rutledge? Mr. Horgan?
Just on that same vein, if sales taxes are collected, there would be no requirement to spend them within a certain period of time, correct?
There is no requirement that they be spent in a period of time. There is a requirement that they have to be spent in the manner that the referendum states that they have to be spent. So it could be that some of the funds would not be expended at the end of the time that you've collected them, but they would remain in an account specifically segregated for that purpose and have to be used for those purposes. But I'm not aware of any time frame that would have to be done within.
Okay. Mr. Rutledge?
And there has been some momentum to details more specifically the use of those funds. Has the school board gone through that process?
The school board, in terms of the sales tax, is that what
Yes,
you-
sir. That they would specify how it's going to be used. I think the
Yeah.
county's done that.
The school board, as my understanding, has scheduled for June 14th to take a vote about whether they want to go out for a referendum to put that on the ballot in November. So they actually have not even made that specific determination yet. That's not till next week. At that point, I think they would need to make whatever representations they were about how those monies would be used and then going forward from there.
And with regard to that process, the school board would make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and then the county commissioners would then make a determination if it should be a referendum. Is that appropriate?
Actually not. In terms of being able to put a referendum on the ballot, the school board has statutory authority to do so. So they don't have to go through the Board of County Commissioners to be able to do that. They can do that on their own.
Okay. And then a similar question with regard to what we're discussing today. The school board has made a determination. It's being sent to first the Planning Commission and then the Board of County Commissioners for, is it appropriate to describe it as approval, or is it something else that we're actually doing today?
Mr. Clegg or Ms. Schenk could probably advise you on that, but my understanding in terms of this approval here. It's just to find it that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and in accordance with the land development code. So
Okay.
I think that's the only thing that's being requested of this board to approve.
Okay, I think I understand, and I just
Yes,
want to make
that-
sure that everybody else understands that.
Yeah, the action request is in the recommended motion to find the proposed ordinance consistent with the county council plan and in accordance with section 341 of the LDC, which speaks to code amendments. It's a requirement of state statute to go through this process.
Thank you. So I think that's important to understand that we're have a limited scope of review and Mr. Bauer.
Just want to clarify, in terms of the sales tax, remember, I don't know if it's widely known, but the sales tax referendum is a renewal of an existing sales tax. It's nothing new that's being added on top of what exists. It's I believe it sunsets in 2018.
Yes, sir. And I have not specifically looked at what they've put on the agenda for their things for the 14th, but it's my understanding, yes, it would just be an extension of their sales tax that expires on December 31st of 2017. So it would start on January 1st of 2018.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions for Mr. Schlank? Seeing none, we're going to move on to the public comment portion of the hearing. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to come forward and make a statement? If you would, please step forward, state your name, and that you have been sworn.
I'm Norm Nelson, citizen, school board watcher. You know, this may be,
And you have been sworn?
I have not.
Okay. This is
I didn't realize I was going to testify.
This is a legislative public hearing, so.
okay. Legislative, sorry. You don't have to be.
Okay. Well, just to follow up, I know it's a simple procedure for you people to say, to vote yea or nay on this thing. But to me, it's a hell of a lot of money. This caveat takes away $89 million worth of revenue. Takes away $89 million worth of revenue as proposed, as it is today, as they voted on, from building new schools. So it's not just a simple process. Hopefully, those 5 board members that voted for originally have seen the light and now know who they represent rather than the special people, but represent all of us. And I'd encourage you to support this and get this onto the county commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience who wishes to come forward and make a statement regarding this item? Okay, seeing none, we're going to close the public hearing portion of the public comment portion of the hearing. And I guess we move on to deliberation if there is any additional deliberation. Seeing none, Chair will consider a motion.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir. Mr. Bauer.
Happily, based on the staff report, evidence presented, comments made at the public hearing, and finding the request to be consistent with the Manatee County Comprehensive Plan in accordance with Section 341 of the LDC, I move to recommend adoption of Manatee County Ordinance 16-32, amending the Manatee County Code of Ordinance as amended and as recommended by staff.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Mr. Horgan, second. Chair will call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item number 5. And this is a legislative action, so. Ms. Knapp, would you please read this?
And, Mr. Chairman, I was going to suggest you open public hearings on 5 and 6 together and vote separately, because I suspect the presentations for the consultant and staff will cover both.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shank. It will open both item number 5 and number 6. Ms. Shank, would you read item 5 into the record, please? I'm sorry. Somebody please read it into the record.
The first is number 5, Plan Amendment 1601, Ordinance 1607, Urban Cores Plan Amendment. This is amending the future land use element to designate the geographic extent of the urban cores within the existing urban service area, providing for definitions amending the potential for development in terms of either intensity or density for properties within the designated urban cores, subject to standards, amending allowable uses, subject to applicable commercial locational criteria, amending the net density restrictions, deleting requirements for special approvals for specified development, and amending provisions of the comprehensive plan to preserve internal consistency. Number 6 is PA 1603, which is ordinance 1623. It's a countywide amendment, and this is a transmittal of a plan amendment amending the Manatee County Comprehensive Plan, providing for a text amendment to introductions chapter, definitions chapter, future land use element, land use operative provisions, and the traffic element.
Thank you, Ms. Knapp. Morning.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Barrett with Building and Development Services, Planning Manager. Again, agenda items number 5 and 6 are legislative, so we do not need to be sworn in for public comment. Agenda item number 5 is related to the urban corridors as they've been defined by the county. And agenda item number 6 relates to plan amendments that deal with the county-wide changes. Originally, when we started this scope, it dealt primarily with dealing with changes proposed for the urban corridors. But as we worked through the amendments, we realized that there were additional changes that could be made county-wide. And just for convenience and understanding the proposed changes, that's why they were broken up into 2 separate ordinances. Again, and agenda item number 5 relates to just those changes proposed for the urban corridors. And agenda item number 6 are related to the county-wide amendments. And just, I'd like to briefly go over a few items, and then I'm going to turn it over to John Osborne. Why we are looking at the urban corridors and why we are here today. Generally, since the 1990s, we've seen new development focus primarily east of I-75 and north of the river, with a slow decline in new development, property values, income levels in Southwest County. And an increase in crime and code enforcement issues within those areas. And these trends that have been noticed for the last 10 years or so have been recognized in previous plans and studies and the public for quite a few years. Today's current land development code regulations really do not accommodate for these older established areas within the core of the county, which make redevelopment in that area difficult. Therefore, we have the amendments that are proposed before you today that will hopefully increase the opportunities within Southwest County along the major corridors, which we will go over in a few minutes. Again, the amendments proposed today are comprehensive plan amendments. This is the document that really guides the development of the county. It sets the policies, goals, and objections that have been directed by the Board of County Commissioners. In future hearings, we will have the proposed changes to the Land Development Code. The Land Development Code is a specific document that provides the regulations for development. And those amendments have been drafted by our consultant and are available for public review on our website today, although they are not being presented before you during this time. First, the amendments to the comprehensive plan need to become adopted, approved, and effective before the future changes to the Land Development Code can come before you. Staff has retained the services of Littlejohn Consultants, and we have Pat Tajewski here today that has been before you in prior public work session to present the proposed recommendations that we have before you today. They have quite a bit of experience within Florida dealing with code and plan amendment revisions and dealing with redevelopment within Florida. But before we go over that, I would like to present John Osborne. He's going to go over some of the background information of those past studies that we have seen in the last 10 years or so that really have brought us to where we are today. And also, I just want to mention that I did pass out to you and entered into the record 2 public comment letters, one from the Manatee Chamber of Commerce, that is a letter of support for the proposed recommended changes, and then an additional public comment letter from Mr. Chuck Price with Palmasola Homeowners Association. They do have some concerns with including the extension of Manatee Avenue, which is one of the corridors past 75th, and we'll go over some of those concerns in a moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Barrett. Mr. Osborne, good morning.
Morning, sir. Morning, Commissioners. I'm John Osborne, I'm the planning official for Manatee County. And just to sort of add on to what Lisa was talking about, and how did we get to where we're at today? And thinking back to a lot of our major corridors in Manatee County, and specifically in the southwest part of Manatee County in the unincorporated areas, Southwest County has really been the heart of the unincorporated parts of Manatee County going back decades. We think of the 1950s and 1960s when actually our population actually doubled between 1950 and 1960 in Manatee County. And what was built during that time? Most of our major infrastructure was built. Also in Southwest County, a tremendous amount of development occurred. The gridding of all of the streets in that area, the road system, the water and sewer systems in that area, a tremendous amount of infrastructure and growth was built in that area during that time period. But thinking about the 1950s and 1960s development pattern, as we all know, is really very suburban and automobile oriented. And you think about US 41 and the Tamiami Trail and what it must have been like before World War II, then the development boom that happened thereafter in the 1950s and 1960s. The road subsequently got widened. Some of those original uses that were right up along the road went away. Now we have strip commercial shopping, hotels, gas stations, and things like that. And that happened all throughout Southwest County along a lot of our major corridors. Fast forwarding to 1985, the Growth Management Act was passed for the state of Florida, mandating every jurisdiction to put together a long-range plan, a comprehensive plan for their community. We have a comprehensive plan for Manatee County, as does every other jurisdiction in the state of Florida. And with that comp plan, we established a future land use map, a map that really guides the maximum densities and intensities and really sets the vision for how we're going to develop Manatee County. But that vision at that time was still very suburban oriented. However, the board back then did reflect, though, this to say that this part of Manatee County, the southwest, a lot of these urban corridors and areas really need something different. They really need something, an urban infill focus. And there was sort of, if you read the policies, it's almost like we punted a little bit, saying, well, we'll work on that later, but here's what we did to meet the intent of the Growth Management Act. And the thing about the development patterns along a lot of those areas today is if you drive down 41 or some of these corridors, especially 41 more than probably than anywhere, you see a lot of buildings that actually were built during that boom for the 1950s and 1960s, very unique architecture and things like that. However, there are buildings there today that were built back then that have a land development regulation that really was from the 1980s, a very different mindset. And now we're trying to do 21st century redevelopment in these areas. It makes it very difficult for development, even for businesses to expand. I've spent a lot of time on both sides of the fence, the public and the private sector, and it's very difficult to have redevelopment in these areas with our current regulations. We've attempted over the years to do a better job at providing incentives and things like that, but really haven't had much success. And over time, there's been a lot of different studies that have all really said the same thing, and they're listed in the staff report. We've had the character compatibility study, which was adopted not only by Manatee County, but all the jurisdictions also in Manatee County. We came to some agreements on height and density and intensity and how we were going to handle development and redevelopment in this part of town. We had the One Bay plan, which was more of a regional-based plan, and our county commission actually adopted an alternative back in 2005, 2007, I believe it was, that we would actually do more focus on growth and redevelopment, provide better incentives for the urban, infill urban core areas, the southwest parts of town. Fast forwarding to even our audits of our comp plan. 2004, the evaluation and appraisal report, also known as the EARS, as we government speak it, calling it an EAR. We did one also in 2011, and the statutes required us to declare actually some major issues. As a community, what are your major issues? Urban infill, urban redevelopment, and some of these areas we declared as major issues as well. And last but not least, the how will we grow efforts and Urban Land Institute efforts. We've really been trying to set the stage for trying to make some changes and allow better things to happen in these areas. And if you drive down these areas today, they've lost their luster. And every time we go to a neighborhood meeting, not necessarily on something that's a land development case related, but our neighborhood services department meets with the neighborhoods associations in these areas on a regular basis, trying to help them out with different things and be sort of that voice back to the county government to try to help them move forward as a community, address any of the issues they have that government can address. And they say a lot of the same things. And what are you going to do about the land use? How come things aren't happening? Why aren't things changing and moving forward like we see in the eastern parts of the county? Why have things changed so much? And generally, like I said, these plans also really say the same thing. The plans that we've adopted over the years really need to loosen the handcuffs a bit when it comes to the zoning and the land use regulations. It's very difficult to apply plan development type land development regulations on things that were built decades ago. It's a very different set of circumstances. We shouldn't be treating these older type communities in older areas and along these corridors like they're greenfield development out east, and that is something that has been said time and time again. In terms of holistic planning, we've also been looking at and thinking about the redevelopment of these areas when we do other planning in the county. Recently, the Metropolitan Planning Organization adopted the Long Range Transportation Plan, which is updated every 5 years. And in that, we put in some more density and intensity coming in to these areas of town, consistent with these approved plans. And with that, we've also looked at the Transit Development Plan, also our water and sewer system master planning. We've also looked at doing those consistent with the population projections that were adopted by our board and the MPO board with those long-range transportation plans. So we've been looking at this area, trying to take a step back and trying to put the bones of the skeleton together. So when we do move forward with potential changes, the bones are in place, the planning is in place, not just from the zoning world, not just from the land use world, but also from the hardscape, the infrastructure, the water and the sewer, and those kinds of things will be in place as well. In terms of public input, and just besides going to different community meetings and neighborhood associations, we've had a lot of conversations with the chamber about this. And back in 2009, actually, the chamber, the infill group, did a presentation to our Board of County Commissioners in a workshop, really focusing on this issue exactly. They took a segment of roadway, I think they had a fictional name for it, but I believe it was somewhere on 41, but they took a fictional road, a fictional development pattern, which really looked like something that exists today on 41. And they really showed you, to our county commission, if you took this thing through a redevelopment process to get something that would actually be an amenity and excitement, a new thing for the area, they showed what you would have to go through and what you would have to ask for in terms of special approvals, specific approvals. It really made it quite a nightmare for a potential something to have happen there. It was a very difficult process for them to go through based upon all the handcuffs that a lot of regulations put in place when it comes to redevelopment. Some other things that we've also been involved with as of late is you've heard about a lot of the efforts by the chamber with millennials and things like that. We've had a couple different major workshops in Southwest County. One was called For Progress. It was the SRQ airport. We had invited all essentially of Southwest County to come out. And we had a lot of public input about if you could redevelop this area, what would you like to see? What would you like to have happen in this area? What would make it more exciting and attractive for you? And not only do we have young people there, but we had people of all ages there participating, and some of that input is provided in the surveys in the back of the packet. We also had we had a millennial conference, and we asked the same questions. What would you like to see happen in this area if we could change things a bit? And those comments, again, are reflected in some of the information in the back of your packet. So in terms of how will we grow, we really have a choice. When somebody thinks about relocating to Manatee County, what choices do they have if they're interested in deciding where they're going to live? What options do they have in terms of locations? All the new stuff seems to be out east or in the northeastern part of the county. What about in Southwest County? Why aren't there opportunities? Why aren't there more opportunities where we have infrastructure, where we have water, where we have sewer, where we have schools already? We already have cops. We already have firemen. We already have the bones of civilization in this area. It's an area that could very easily and efficiently serve certainly redevelopment and generally speaking, more development. So in conclusion, before I turn over to Pat, just want to think about this and think about what you see when you drive down these corridors. How can we make it better? What do we need to change? How can we loosen the handcuffs a little bit to allow some bigger and better things to happen that will better complement our community and better give a sense of place as we drive down these major corridors in Manatee County? Pat?
Good morning. My name is Pat Tajewski. I'm a senior planner with Littlejohn Engineering, and I'm going to take you through a brief PowerPoint presentation with some of the details. Is it in show already, or you do that, or do we do that? All right, so you heard a lot of the background from Lisa and from John, but I'm going to do a little recap of that, and then I'm going to go through the specific changes related to the urban corridors and also the countywide. In terms of background, again, all we're doing is implementing a vision that has been established through so many studies that we have gone through in the past. Part of the exercise that we went through as we were preparing for this project, we did 3 case studies. We looked at 3 sites in the area and tried to figure out, okay, what would it take to develop something that would be more in line with the vision? Realized that there were a lot of barriers to infill and redevelopment, So that gave us the basis for what kind of changes we needed to look into. We have had concurrent review of the plan amendments and the code amendments. Today, we can only look at the comprehensive plan amendments, but just to let you know that people have been looking at the code at the same time. So we're not just talking about the big picture, but we have also gone into the details. Again, we're doing urban corridors and countywide amendments. And we have had numerous opportunities for public input. The last one was just last week. So looking at the map on the right, it's kind of small, but basically what we have defined as urban corridors are Manatee Avenue West, Cortez Road West, 53rd Avenue West, 14th Street West / US 41, 15th Street East, and 1st Street. Now, the way to delineate the beginning and end of each of these segments, we are proposing to utilize the boundaries of the urban service area. So if Manatee Avenue, for example, it would go from the boundary of that service area from the west to the east, and of course it excludes any portions that would be within the city limits. So as John mentioned, the comprehensive plan is our vision for the future. The comprehensive plan includes two components, main components. One is your future land use map, and then your comprehensive plan elements, future land use, housing, utilities, transportation, et cetera. The main changes that we're proposing cover the land use categories and your goals and objectives and policies in the future land use element. That's where most of the changes are. And the whole idea with this is, again, to facilitate infill and redevelopment. So what do we mean by that in terms of comprehensive planning? We want to allow and encourage mixed use, because even though the plan has been saying that in the past, it is very difficult for anybody to come in and say, I want to have ground floor retail and apartments or condos above. So we wanted to make sure that that was clear and that was doable. In order to do that, we had to increase your densities and intensities, because the types of densities, intensities, and setbacks and regulations in general were preventing that type of development from happening. And the last thing that we wanted to do was eliminate some of the obstacles that we have right now, and I'll go into more detail later. In terms of future land use categories, if you look at the map on the right, it shows the current land use on those sites. So whether it's a retail establishment or a single-family home, and what we have ended up with is a lot of strip commercial. If you look at those corridors, you see red as far as the eye can see, and we don't see the mix that we have been talking about. So that's what we wanted to fix. So in order to do that, we concentrated just on those corridors, and we looked at what land use categories we had that we could work with. Well, we found that we have 5 land use categories that we needed to address. The first one was one called retail, office, residential, which you would assume that you could do any of those uses, but the way it was designed in the past, it was that you would do one or the other, but it wouldn't allow you to do it on one site. The next one is the mixed-use category. Again, it's supposed to encourage mixed use, but because of the densities and intensities, it was not achieving that along these corridors. Then we had the residential land use categories, and we're looking at changes to RS6 all the way through 16, nothing under RS residential 6. And then we also looked at the industrial categories, and those are mainly along 15th Street East. I have a couple of slides just to give a little primer on density and intensity, because sometimes it can be deceiving. When you think about density, people think the higher the density, the busier that site is going to be, the more buildings that you're going to see. Those 4 little drawings show exactly the same density. So density depends, what you see from the street depends on how you design your site. If you're going to have individual units spread out throughout your site, or if you're going to have them, in 5 or 6 stories. So it looks very different. So we thought it would be really important that if we were going to allow higher density and higher intensity, to have design standards, so we can at least control how that density and intensity is going to feel in the districts. This is intensity again. The way we measure intensity is with floor area ratio, and that's the proportion of your building to your site. So those 4 examples show a floor area ratio of 1, meaning the size of your building is the same size as your site. So top left, it shows that you could cover the entire site with an FAR of 1, but if you decide to go multi-story, most of your site is going to be empty, and then you're going to have your floor stacked up to that FAR of 1. Now, when we start talking about mixed use, you have to figure out how to calculate that. And that was something that was lacking in the plan and the land development code, so we were proposing language to address that. Now, getting to the specific changes. So I mentioned that we had some changes to the residential land use categories and also to the non-residential land use categories. So I'm going to go through the residential first. So for residential 6, the main change that we're proposing is an increase in the non-residential intensity. We're not proposing any changes to the density in that land use category. Now, because this is a residential area, you're not supposed to just go in and do commercial. You have a goal already in your plan that deals with commercial locational criteria. Basically what it says is, yes, you can have a residential area, but if you have the right location, the right intersection, and the right amount of land, you could have some type of commercial development. So we're saying that that's still the case. We're not just going to introduce commercial to residential 6 just by right, but you would still have to go through that process. And then the other change is that we're introducing hotels as a potential use. And when we say potential use, it means that the land use category may allow hotels or will allow hotels, but it depends on the zoning. So not all zoning districts within that residential 6 would allow the hotels. And we also put a note saying that only if you're in an urban corridor. So it's not like we're doing this for the whole county. The other changes that we made to the residential land use categories, we increased densities in the RES 9 through the 16. So just to give you an idea, for 9, we went from 9 to 20 dwelling units per acre. For 12 to 20. For 16, we went from 16 to 20. In terms of intensity, we also increased from 0.23 to 1 FAR. Now, these changes are going to be subject to those design standards that I mentioned before. So that's specifically stated in the plan. Something that we're doing too is introducing the idea of intensity and density bonuses. So if you have the right location, if you have an adequate size lot, if you're not next to residential, we may let you go a little bit higher than those numbers that I mentioned before. Let me see what else. There is a footnote at the very bottom, residential 16, and it says we eliminated the commercial size restriction for residential 16, but when you go to that policy, it specifies what the FAR would be if you are allowed to have commercial within that land use category. And then the land development code would have additional restrictions for the size of those commercial establishments within that category. In terms of the non-residential, the changes here are a little bit more drastic. If we look at the ROR, for example, we're going from 9 dwelling units per acre to 30 dwelling units per acre. And with the bonus, you can go even higher to 40 dwelling units per acre. In terms of non-residential intensity, we're going from 0.25 to 1, typically, but then with a bonus, you could go up to 2 FAR. Now, if you think about this ROR, this is one of the most intensive land use categories. This is where you want your mixed use to happen. This is where you want your activity to start happening. For the industrial districts, we also increased the intensity. There is no density involved there. And for mixed use, same thing. So the mixed use and the ROR would be the most intensive land use categories. Now, some other changes that are not related to density and intensity. I mentioned before that there were certain barriers for development. You have something interesting in your comprehensive plan is that it will say, for example, this land use category allows you to do 9 dwelling units per acre, but if you are going to do more than 3, then you have to go through special approval. For the urban corridors, we're eliminating that. If the land use category says 16, well, that should be 16. You shouldn't have to go through additional reviews or considerations. And remember, you always have the zoning to do that type of stuff. The other one is plan development. You have things like if you're going to have to do buffers to protect uses around you, then you have to go through plan development. And I don't know if you're realizing, plan development is a rezoning. You're changing the zoning on your property now to a type of district that whenever somebody comes into the counter to ask about that development, they have to pull the PUD ordinance to see what the setbacks were, what the height was. So it's not something that would be in your code. So that's something that we're trying to discourage. We're going to have very detailed regulations for the urban corridors, so people wouldn't have to go to that plan development and much less require it from them. And then the next one, your plan includes gross density and net density. Typically, that's done when you have environmentally sensitive areas, wetlands and lakes, but we don't have a lot of that in this area. So we're just going with the gross density. We're eliminating net density for the urban corridors. Now, this map, we put it here because as we went through the public workshops, some people were concerned that we're increasing density, but we still have some residential districts in the area. Now, whenever, and we put several provisions in the plan, and we're proposing to have them in the land development code that says, sure, this category can, will allow you to go up to 30 if you can fit your development on that site. Because if you're next to residential, we're going to ask you to put some buffers and setbacks to protect that single-family residential district. So not every site is going to be able to develop at the height or the density or intensity that we're proposing. And then at the workshop, again, last week, we were talking about, would 15 be okay? Would 20 be okay? We have time to get to those numbers because the plan amendments do not mention anything about specific buffers. So when we start looking at the land development code in more detail, we can talk about those. And based on the comments we received last week, we're going to be looking into that. We're going to see, what other communities do and look at actual examples of what happens when you have a 5-story building next to a single-family home. So we know it's a concern, and that will be addressed between now and the time we bring the land development code to you. Another question that was asked was, could these urban corridors start crawling into the neighborhoods? If you have a property on, let's say, 14th Street, what if they buy the property behind them and then the property behind them? The way it was set up is to allow some of that to happen, but you have to have the appropriate land use category. So let's say that you have a site that is ROR, it's right on the corridor, and then they have something that is residential 3 behind, and then they buy that property. Well, they're going to have to come before you and say, can I change this to ROR? Or to MU, or to some of the other categories that would allow this type of development. So it's not like they can just go and buy property and then, assume that they can just do the same type of development. So I mentioned most of the changes were future land use between goals and objectives and policies and map. But we also looked at other chapters, other elements. In the definitions chapter, we included, of course, a definition of urban corridors, and we included a map. And there have been some concerns about, for example, on Manitou Avenue West, should we go past 75 or should we go all the way to the urban service boundary? Those details, to tell you the truth, to create this district, it was a lot easier to select a boundary that was already established rather than trying to use legals and streets and making it more complicated. But it's up to the board, to decide exactly where these corridors stop and go. Other changes that we made in the definitions chapter was related to, now we're using the term mixed use. How do we deal with that? So we had a few definitions added. In terms of countywide. So Lisa and John mentioned that as we were going through this process, there were a few things that we noticed that we wanted to fix. Now that we're doing this, why not fix that? And they were not just specifically related to the urban corridors. They were applicable countywide. Just to give you some examples, there were some sections in the comprehensive plan that we felt were buried or are not as visible or not where they should be. So we moved them to other elements within the plan. There were some sections that really didn't belong in the plan. They should be in the land development code. So at this point, what we're doing is taking them out. They're going to be sort of like in limbo for a little while until we go into the land development code and then adopt them into the land development code. Some examples of that, nonconformities or special exception. What if something is not compliant with the comprehensive plan? Typically, that's dealt with in the land development regulations, not in the plan. Definitions, we did a thorough review, making sure that both the code and the plan have the same definitions. You have an interesting chapter in your comprehensive plan. It's called Land Use Operative Provisions. We hadn't seen that before, and as we started reviewing that chapter, realized that a lot of those sections should be somewhere else. And there is a section on parcel-specific policies. Well, we moved that to the land use element, where you have all the land use policies. And that's why we had a lot of changes to the maps, because the maps have a little label that says C, land use operative provisions, section D, whatever. So we had to change that reference to refer to the future land use element. And then transportation. This is an interesting one, too. The current plan says that the county needs to establish a transportation concurrency exception area. And we already have two. They have been in the books for several years now. So we wanted to change that language to expand, because now that we're talking about urban corridors, mixed-use districts, we're thinking that those two may need to be expanded. The idea of transportation concurrency exception is not that we're going to exempt them from everything. It just means that we're going to start looking at transportation more in a multimodal frame of mind. It's not expanding lanes. It's not, building, turning lanes and that sort of thing anymore. It's more of, we want to make this area pedestrian. Some congestion is going to happen, which is good. It's going to help with mass transit, and it's going to help with people starting to bike and walk the district. Now, whenever you do a future land use map amendment that entails an increase in density and intensity, you always have to do an impact analysis. Basically, does the county have adequate resources to serve that additional growth? When you do a single site, it's a little bit easier because they have a development program and you know when they're going to build that. It's going to be in 2 years or 5 years. When you do something the scale that we're looking at right now, it's a little bit more complicated. And the numbers look a little bit scary, to tell you the truth. But what we know is that this is not going to happen overnight. We're not talking about a 5-year plan. We know that this is going to take time. We're not forcing people to do the higher density and intensity. We're just providing the option. So in your staff report, you probably saw a lot of tables and numbers and millions of square feet of this and that. We're required to go through that by state. And the text that I have on this slide comes from the state statutes, and it says when you're going to do a future land use amendment, consider these criteria. And some of them are, for example, need for redevelopment, discouraging urban sprawl, and we're doing those things. So we looked at housing needs, we looked at transportation, water, sewer, solid waste, schools, parks, and natural features. And we work closely with staff to make sure we use the appropriate multipliers for each of them. Something that a lot of people don't realize about this, and it was interesting to hear some people at the workshop last week saying, but why don't we make this mandatory? As you all know, this area is not like it's booming. It's not like we're having people knock on our doors saying, we want to build, we want to build. So we don't want to stop development. So we're going to allow what's happening right now. If somebody wants to come in and do a Starbucks or a restaurant and use current standards, they can still do it. But if somebody wants to come in and do quality infill or redevelopment at higher densities and higher intensities, we're going to say, yes, you can do it too. You're welcome. We're incentivizing that. We're encouraging that. So we may still see some of the same old happening along the corridors, but as property values increase, people are going to realize that it will be better to go a little bit denser, a little bit more intense, and start providing the much needed housing for the workforce, for lower income residents, for anybody who wants to live in an area where they can walk to different places and they don't have to rely so much on their automobiles. So that's in a nutshell what we're trying to do today. And just to give you an idea of the next steps, so we're going to go to the board on June 21st, and that's going to be a transmittal hearing. So that means the plan amendments will be sent to the Department of Economic Opportunity. They review that. It takes about 30 days for review. Now, the different agencies may send their comments back to the county, whether they agree or disagree or are concerned with something. And then if everything goes well, then we're going to have the adoption hearing with the board. Once those plan amendments are adopted, in place, appeal period, effective date, then we can start looking at the Land Development Code amendments for adoption. So we're still looking for some time between now and that time that we can still receive public comments on the details of the Land Development Code amendments. So at that point, we'll bring the Land Development Code amendments to you, then we go to the board, 2 hearings, and then we'll be done with that. If you have any questions, comments, and I know that this was a very brief overview, but any detailed questions, we'll be happy to answer.
Thank you. Thank you. I like the idea of using the urban service boundary. It seems to reinforce the idea that that's where the infrastructure is in place and that this option is available. I have a couple questions about the implementation. This is the land development code. This doesn't really change the zoning. It's just going to reestablish or revise the future land use for each of these areas. Is that correct?
Yeah, today, what we're doing today is just looking at some changes to their future land use categories. We're not changing anybody's land use category itself. They're still going to have the same category, but we're changing the maximum densities and intensities and for some of those land use categories.
So let me make sure I understand. So you could have a land use category that has different rights depending on the address?
Yes. So if you have ROR on the east side, you cannot do 20 dwelling units per acre. You have to be in the urban service area to be able to do 20 dwelling units per acre.
And how will the zoning component of it be?
Yeah, we looked at, and we didn't bring any of, well, actually, we have the table here, but basically, in the land development code, you're going to have a table that says, okay, if you're in the ROR land use category, these are your options for zoning districts. So you may do general commercial, you may do, I don't know the zoning districts, but it will tell you which districts you can do within each land use category. And then, even though ROR says 20 dwelling units per acre, it doesn't mean that, all the zoning districts within ROR are going to have that same density. Or for example, height. If you have neighborhood commercial within ROR, we're not going to allow you to do the same type of commercial that you could do in general commercial. So yeah, there is one more step that is going to tighten things up a little bit more.
Okay. And has there been any consideration, I'm sure there has, but maybe you could speak to it, is this going to create any non-compliant areas, non-compliant zoning or land use categories?
No, and the reason for not creating those is because we're still going to allow what's happening today.
Okay.
So if somebody comes in after all these amendments are in place and they want to build something that was built this year, they can still do it.
Okay. All right. And then my last question is with regard to the transportation exception areas.
Yes.
That was a pretty quick introduction. I've not heard of that previously.
Okay.
Could you explain where the areas currently are?
I'll let John do a little bit of the background of where they are now.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Commissioner Connolly, John Osborne, planning official. We have two transportation concurrency exception areas existing in Manatee County. And if you recall, years ago, we had two community redevelopment areas along the US 41 corridor. And when we created the transportation concurrency exception areas, we created those two areas right smack dab on top of those two community redevelopment areas. One is along 14th Street from Cortez Road north, essentially like the city of Bradenton, that corridor. And further south, we had a transportation concurrency exception area along US 41. Oh, thanks, Lisa. This is the 14th Street one from Cortez Road north up to the city limits. So that is still an existing. The acronym is TCEA. So that's currently one today. And put the other one up there if you don't mind, Lisa. And this is the other one. This was formerly the community redevelopment area, a very large area, but you can see 41 on the west side, all the way over to 15th Street and all that area inside there. And the CRAs actually, we don't have CRAs in these areas anymore. They were somewhat successful in terms of their ability to actually, what they really did a good job at was getting everybody together to talk about the issues, focus on there was a lot of neighborhood focus with these, and they did a great job with that, and that effort still continues to this day. We didn't see massive infill and redevelopment occur because of them. But we left the transportation concurrency exception areas in place. But future development along the corridors in the urban infill area, it's going to be the urban core, the major corridors, we'll have to go through the same transportation review process as anything else does today. Now, in the TCEAs, it's a little bit different, but you still do an analysis. There's no free ticket to anything. You still have to go through a transportation concurrency analysis no matter where you're at.
And there was I believe it was described as an expanded TCEA, or is it new areas that would be?
In the future, we may be bringing back something that is an expanded TCEA. But right now, these are the two TCEAs that exist.
Okay, all right. Something for the future. All right, thank you very much. Are there any other, Mr. Rhodes?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. For either John, Mr. Osborne, or Lisa, I'm in favor of everything that I've been hearing over the past year almost, and I've attended the workshops and everything. But when I was looking, I'm confused here, when I was looking at the documents that we were given to review, and I'm just reading from a note I took, it said that this amendment before us today is to improve opportunities for infill, redevelopment, and development, but does not include residences. But everything I've been hearing is both mixed, residential, and commercial. And I'm not sure what is meant by does not include residences in that.
And allow me to clarify, Mr. Rhodes. What we're trying to, I think the point we're trying to get across is the neighborhoods behind the corridors. We weren't trying to make any changes to the communities, the existing subdivisions that live behind the corridors. That has been some of the fears as we've talked about years past with allowing different things to happen along the corridors and redevelopment, generally speaking, in Southwest County and other parts of the urban core areas of Manatee County, that people were afraid that, oh my gosh, now my neighborhood is going to change. Well, no, we limit it to just the corridors and the properties along these corridors with inside our urban service area, which is outside of the coastal hazard area. So we really refined it just the properties along these roadways in that specific area that would have these advantages in place if it was passed by you and the Board of County Commissioners.
Okay, thank you.
Apologize for that. We thank you
Understand
for
that,
clarifying
right.
that.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Horgan?
Back on the question about the transportation exception, I think in your presentation you said it was to encourage congestion, to encourage bike and mass transportation use. And from a personal perspective, I actually drive from outside the area right smack into the area to take my dog in to be groomed right at the intersection of 41 and State Road 70, 53rd. And you're encouraging me to take my bike to the edge of this and ride my dog into the, that's sort of the craziest, application of it. But I mean, why are we doing that? I mean, we have congestion in Manatee County now. Why would we encourage more congestion in certain areas?
And maybe that's another clarification we need to make as well. When we have all the existing uses, for example, on the 41 corridor, we have a lot of former shopping centers and former uses that aren't really what they used to be. There may be less than they used to be. There's, for example, I think of the old Taco Bell on 41 near Bayshore. It's now something else. If that were to redevelop into something else, you think about what the past trip generation rate was. Fast food restaurant, the drive-thru is very high. You actually could replace that with something else quite substantial if it was residential, perhaps, quite a large residential use, and it would equal the same trip generation rate. So when you think about redevelopment, we got to really think about utilizing transit. And when you think about transit-oriented design, that is something, there's different things that you can do with your design of your projects to make them more transit-friendly. So you walk shorter distances to things. You have more variety of uses along the corridor. And that's what we're trying to do, is really, again, like I keep saying, loosen those handcuffs a little bit, allow some other things to happen. And as we're also, the US 41 has been designated by the state as a multimodal enhancement corridor. And the bus routes that traverse 41 are outside of the beaches, are some of our busiest and most heavily utilized bus routes. And if you think about all the uses along the corridor, you could almost live your life on some of these corridors. There's a doctor, there's a place to eat, there's grocery stores. What's really missing is sometimes place to live that's right along the corridor in a more urban fashion. That is something, if you look at some of the things that have been coming out from everything from AARP to the National Association of Realtors saying that retiring boomers, young millennials, they're all looking for the same thing. They don't want to drive the 2 hours every day like their parents did or whatever. They want something more walkable, more user-friendly for cycling. And this is the kind of things, all these efforts are really coming together, especially for the 41 corridor. You'll see a lot more projects coming in that the state will be funding to improve the walkability and the bikeability of that corridor specifically, and the environs outside of that corridor as well. Hopefully I answered your question, Mr. Horgan.
Well, it still leaves the question that you have these areas that you're encouraging people to come to, but the transportation exception is sort of encouraging congestion. That's the part that I'm having a difficult time wrapping my head around, that why would we want to encourage more congestion anywhere?
Well, one of the things about the concurrency, the way it works today, is outside of the two areas we talked about, the transportation concurrency exception areas, you will have to do the same traffic study you would if you were building anywhere else in the county. So they will have to do any type of offsite mitigation or whatever that ends up being as the result of whatever study is they're doing. So there still is that component. There's still, not to say that we're encouraging congestion, that's probably not the right way to say that, but you still have to mitigate your traffic and transportation. But we're allowing designs of things that instead of having the front door of that whatever building 50 feet from the sidewalk with a parking lot between, it could be closer to the road. So people are more likely, if they do walk, more likely to frequent that business because it's a closer proximity. Some of the changes we're making encourage walkability and make it easier to do, make it easier to see yourself walking or biking or taking the bus places. And Pat, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention a comment that we heard at the workshop. Somebody was saying, why are we putting more intensity and more density in that area? And I said, well, what is the option? Because people are coming. I mean, Manatee County is one of the fastest growing counties right now. Do we let them go where they have been going, keep going into the suburban and rural areas, and then the roads that connect to those areas get wider and wider and wider, and we end up with highways throughout the county? Or do we select an area that is going to be the more intensive, more dense area, and we know that people are going to start walking in that area because it's designed for that purpose? We know people are not going to be walking in the suburban area of the county because the way the subdivisions were designed, people are not going to be able to do that. So that's why the county selected this area, because we have the infrastructure, we have the connectivity, we have the scale of the area lends itself to allow for that. And I know that not everybody's going to want to live there. Some people still like to live in their more quiet neighborhoods and more rural areas. But those people who like the activity, who like to live within a block from the grocery store, that's the option that we're providing to them. And then when we start talking about, and I didn't mean to say encourage congestion, it's just that we are going to encourage people to walk, we're going to encourage people to bike so that they don't take their car. And that's, a few cars less on those roads. Now, congestion is kind of like a result from the more people coming into the area.
My understanding is a little different than Mr. Horgan's. Mr. Horgan's car trip is going to be the same regardless of what's happening, but the idea is to create an area where people would want to live, and those are the trips that are coming off the roadways, not the people who have to come in from outside. The idea is to create a more compact area where the users are right there. Isn't that the intent?
And I think important thing to keep in mind too is zoning and land use changes never made one more person move anywhere. However, when people are thinking about locating here, or they're living here in a rental situation, where are they going to buy, where they want to live, if they chose Parrish or somewhere out east, and everything is on this side of town. A lot of your shopping, not everything, but a lot of your shopping, your employment centers, a lot of the doctors, the medicals, there's certainly more and more happening out there, but most of that stuff is on this side of town. So you want people utilizing 30 lane miles per capita per day like people in Parrish do, or 5 lane miles per capita per day and living in this area? And that's the option. Right now, we don't have that option for people if they want to make that leap. It doesn't exist. So right now, if you want something new or live somewhere bright and shiny, you're way out there instead of having an opportunity to live here closer to where everything is. And utilize a lot less of the infrastructure per capita. It's a lot more efficient for us to serve places like this than it is way out.
Mr. Horgan.
With what I've said, in addition to that, I just bought a condominium at the corner of the 2 main streets in the town in North Carolina, so I could walk to all of the restaurants and everything there. So I understand intellectually and emotionally the desire to do that. It's just the way it was worded earlier in the presentation, it just sort of created an issue for me to try and, flush out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bauer?
I've been to several workshops so far as well, and probably I'm the one of the few, I guess, or few skeptics about this plan. So I understand how will we grow, and understand the needs to grow, but I'm born and raised right here. And I cannot conceptualize people southwest Bradenton here, again, where I grew up all my life, hopping on a bus or walking to their business. Like, I can see a few people, okay? I get that. But I don't see enough people that is going to make a dramatic impact on the traffic and congestion that we have, and it's going to be encouraging them. Take 26th Street full of the doctors, or area by Mandy High School with all the dentists and so forth. You know what? Those dentists aren't going to walk to their office and live somewhere over there, or that doctor is not going to be have an office downstairs, an apartment upstairs. I'm betting we're going to hear from Mr. Marshall today, who wrote a letter to us, and I agree with a lot of what he says in terms of, especially Southwest Bradenton. I can see it potentially working on Tamiami Trail over a course of quite a while, I think. 15th Street maybe as well. There's certain areas in terms of, I can see it potentially working. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it did. I don't see it working on Cortez Road. I certainly, there's an area out here on Manatee Avenue between 75th Street and Palmasola Bay. I think including them in this might have some unintended consequences of having to fight over these rules that you're broadening the rules. And as it is already, there's a whole lot of fights that the community is up against between what the community wants and the developers want, and what the comprehensive plan allows and have to approve because it allows that. My fear is if you put all this together into one amendment and allow all these things to be done with this vision, that we really don't know if it's going to work or not. And again, in large part of Bradenton, I don't see it working. But I'd be more comfortable to say, okay, let's work on Tamiami Trail and say 15th Street, and let's see it work, or begin to work, and see the actual data and things of that nature actually working. And then maybe we consider how other areas, which definitely need to be revitalized. There's no doubt about it. Bayshore, some areas here along Cortez, but, I live out West Cortez. I don't want to see a 5-story building of some sort along that road. That's just not the way we live. People in West Bradenton, for the most part, live in West Bradenton for a certain reason. It's the way things have always been, so to speak. It's that homey feeling. It's their next-door neighbors that they've known forever, or they do know. Most people who grew up in Bradenton live, actually, in West Bradenton. People live out east because they want that lifestyle, and I get it. I don't want it, but I get why they do. I think you need to be careful in terms of what you approve, in terms of a comprehensive plan amendment for this entire area of Southwest Bradenton. So I have a few more things later on, I think, but I just want to get that out.
Thank you. Mr. Rutledge?
So I'm the other guys. I'm the east side guys. I've only been here 10 years, and I'm the antithesis of that. And I appreciate that. But I can say I see all this. And having seen what's been proposed at Lake Flores, the multimodal design, the expansion of IMG, I think this is the most dynamic area to be redeveloped. I think it is the Florida story. I'm here. I don't want to change it. I think it's a challenge that I haven't seen anybody win. I grew up in Pompano when there was no grocery store. It's not like that. But I do think you can do a good job of doing this. I like this very much. I think this is the progressive approach. This is the right analysis. I'm not sure it's going to be perfect. And I'm sure that not everybody who already has a place where I have bunnies. I had 3 deer in my lawn this morning. It's great. it probably is going to change. That's kind of life. So I like it very much. I would like to bring 3 points up. One is, what's the city of Bradenton say when you say all this stuff? Anything? You talk to them? They seen this?
They have. We've actually been coordinating with them. They did a plan with Dover Cole Associates several years ago. They have a more of a they changed their zoning to allow more density, and things like that. You notice some of the redevelopment that's occurred on Manatee Avenue, very close to the street, very architecturally nice. Some of that new stuff is really good looking. And part of Pat's contract was to coordinate with them, take a look what they did. So when our part of Manatee Avenue won't look substantially different. So when you drive down the road, you really can't tell when you're in the city or out of the city, or the way the city limits are. You're in, you're out, as you drive down the road west. But if development happens, or redevelopment happens along that corridor, the unincorporated side, it shouldn't look substantially different what you see with their newer codes. And we coordinated that with Tim Polk,
Yeah.
the previous planning director.
Is retiring, yeah. There are 3 things I think that are critical in my view, and I take a little bit of the developers, because I've kind of plotted around down here trying to get stuff done. How much time will be saved in the process? In other words, when we make these change, somebody comes in and says, I want to do a development. I have a plan, a tenant, capital, whatever they have. How much time is saved intellectually from the time we do this versus what we have been doing? And then that correlates to cost. And the last thing is certainty of completion. Because those are all the 3 things when somebody says, I want to go into West or East Bradenton. If you go to certain PUDs, you have all those things. When you go into the community, you sometimes don't have that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we've had been the bearer of bad news at our zoning counter and also many pre-apps for existing businesses even. Because when they come in and they tell you what they want to do, they can expand or do something different, you have to go through the plan development process because because their site was built in 1950, the setbacks and all that they didn't really have a lot of zoning and stuff back then. It's not consistent with what we have today. So they come up with a laundry list of special approvals, and so it makes it look like they're doing something they shouldn't be doing. But in reality, is they're doing something to really improve the area, put reinvestment back in the area. And we've had to been that bearer of bad news, but the problem is partly the hearing process. You have to go through, it's lengthy, and it's shorter now than it used to be. During the past development boom, 2005, 2007, when I was in the private sector, 12 months to get before you all. And if you're that potential developer, that property owner, you're putting that property in limbo, you're paying money to that owner and for a maybe, committing $100,000 or more to design work for a maybe before you all and before the board. And if you say no, or you have changes, and that's more money, and you think of the cost of development on the urban side and this side of town and redevelopment versus something where there's a pasture today, very different deal, very different costs, very different potential loans you can get even. So we have to put more incentives on this side of town because the business reality of doing redevelopment is very different. And that's why when you drive down the corridor today, the land uses that are there, the zoning that's in place, that's why the things still look the way they do. The uses haven't changed because a lot of the rules are very restrictive. Not to say that everything would redevelop to the maximum, and it isn't. If you look at the future land use map today that's adopted for the whole county or unincorporated county, most everything isn't built to the maximum or even near the maximum. And we don't expect that to happen like that either. However, we don't provide the opportunity to even fix what we got. And that's sort of the struggle. But in terms of time-wise, you would go from, a 9-month process to a 3-4 month process, perhaps, depending upon how much you could overlap as well. If you're going through the administrative site plan review process for a final site plan, that's a lot quicker. It goes through all the same review. It's handled administratively. And then you can overlap your building permit process on top of that, typically. So you save a lot of time that way, too. But if you have to go through rezone and the plan development process, it's a year, reality-wise. And that's another problem. It's a lot more expensive.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Oh, Amy Anderson with the school board.
Thank you.
I just have a couple of comments that we've submitted and some questions. Starting in the future land use element, there's an amendment 139 where it's amending objective 2.13.1. The current language that's in this conflicts with the interlocal agreement with the public school facilities. And in that, it states that public educational facilities shall be allowed in all comprehensive plan future use categories. except heavy industrial conservation and preservation categories. And in the existing language right now, it's prohibiting new schools in recreational open space areas unless there's a park next to it. It also prohibits schools in UF3 and unless there's some circumstances met. And it's the same thing with agricultural rural. And we had submitted comments asking that these be removed. And not only that, we're seeing that those same conflicting policies are being copied to other policies. So now they're going to be in there twice. So right now, the school district is looking to, I believe this might be a legal question with Sarah. We've been talking with her a little bit about it. But right now, do you agree that that current language conflicts with the interlocal agreement?
Well, first of all, the county attorney's office hasn't had an opportunity to view the changes. That's something staff will look at and bring back through a county issue amendment in the future. My concern today is that we're limited to what was advertised for public hearing. The consultant's scope of work did not include changing anything regarding school planning. So it's not addressed because it wasn't the task of the consultant to do that. She was tasked solely with the urban corridors and the countywide cleanup amendments. So this request for the school board that came late after the public hearing notice has been advertised for planning commission and for board can be considered by staff and processed appropriately as a separate amendment and go through planning commission and board.
For clarification, those conflicts exist currently?
I don't know if the conflicts or not. I haven't looked at it. This came up very late.
Okay,
And these are numerous amendments, and I was focusing on what we were considering today.
thank you. Ms. Barrett?
Mr. Chairman, if I could clarify, the concerns that were raised by the school board are in the countywide changes, and yes, those provisions exist in the comprehensive plan today. They're just being relocated into specific policies within the plan. They are not consistent with the interlocal agreement, but there's a few inconsistencies also that exist in the land development code today that also need to be cleaned up. As Ms. Shank said, it was not advertised, so we'd have to bring that back at a separate ordinance.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, there was no advertisement to allow amendments to this objective 2.13.
This purpose of this project is the urban corridors. We cannot change the general intent and purpose and applicable state statute. If we add something substantive now, there's a substantial material change. We risk a legal challenge by affected property owner, and there are hundreds of affected property owners within these corridors. And if the property owner prevails because we improperly noticed it, then all this work is gone. It's void ab initio, we start from scratch. John Osborne will tell you that years have been spent just getting to this point. I'm not risking or bringing at legal risk the county's initiated amendments or suggesting you do so by adding these housekeeping amendments. I'm not arguing, Ms. Merrill or Anderson, as to what the validity of these amendments or whether they should be made. My concern is the integrity of the process and to sustaining the legal challenges to the ordinances. So these changes can be processed by staff a later date as staff deems appropriate and the county commission deems appropriate.
So in the advertisement, there's nothing in there that says you can amend this objective?
I'm not being cross-examined by the school board representative right now. My opinion
that's-
stands. We have not advertised these changes. We cannot recommend the plan commission you take action on them today. They may be valid, but school planning is a substantive, important issue and deserves its own text amendment and to process appropriately.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could clarify too, the revision to policy 2.13.2.1 is minor. It's changing planning commission to Manatee County. We did not advertise for every specific minor amendment, such as cleanups or consistency throughout the comp plan.
Thank you. I think that the scope of the item before us is very narrow, and it doesn't include what the school board's asking, and I think it's clear that it has to be addressed, but not at this point. Thank you.
And we acknowledge that.
Yeah.
So the amendment allows amending urban fridge 3 recreational open space. And those are the two sections that I'm talking about under this section 12.13.
Right. I think the county attorney's office made it clear we're not going to consider those items. It'll be handled at a later date.
So there's a requirement for this conflicting information to be copied into another section?
Yes.
There is a legal requirement
Not
to
a
copy
legal
it?
requirement. If it's in there now, it's copied, it'll be done. But as it's been stated, it's not going to be considered
So you're
during
going
this
to
hearing.
copy the conflicting information and put in other objectives?
It's for consideration for a vote today, yes.
Just hypothetically, if the school board was looking to purchase property and submitted a letter like a week ago, trying to purchase property in UF3, which would stand, the comp plan or the interlocal agreement?
Mr. Chairman, if the school board staff needs a meeting with the planning staff of the county to coordinate any future school siting issues, that would be the appropriate realm.
Right.
I don't want the planning commission making determinations on
Well,
school
I'm
siting.
not going to
right
deal
now.
with hypothetical situations. We're going to deal with the matter before the board today. As was stated, I think this is a matter best handled outside of this forum. This isn't the appropriate forum.
So can we meet with staff prior to the Board of County Commission meeting to
I
discuss
can't speak for
this?
staff, but
They work every day.
I think, yes,
Chairman,
ma'am.
we are open to conversations that we have had with the school board, but again, those changes have to come in a separate ordinance. They cannot be changed before a Board of County Commissioners because they were not advertised or taken into consideration for your Planning Commission's recommendation today. It's not that we're in disagreement with the changes, but it has to be properly advertised.
Okay, so we can get with staff to talk about moving forward with the changes and the other changes that need to be made.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns before we move to the public hearing portion of the hearing?
Can I make one other request? So one of the challenges in these urban corridor, that's really problematic, so in working in Castleberry, here in Bradenton and some of the stuff we did, the challenge a lot of times is these sizing, the 50 sizing of product, the land that you're converting, is never really consistent with the new prototypes of the new stores, the new residential components, the new services. And so your comment about the protection of the residential component, so it's hard to creep in to gather enough square footage. Could you just describe a little bit more for me what the intent is?
Just to clarify, so you have a site that is retail office residential. Let's say you have 1 acre. And behind you, there is a single-family home.
Or two.
And, yeah, or two, or the whole subdivision. You go in and buy that subdivision. By that whole subdivision, let's say it's residential 3. So just by purchasing it doesn't make it part of your urban corridor. You cannot do the higher density or the higher intensity until you change the land use category for that site. So you would have to change the residential 3 to something else. It can be the 6 or 12 or 16 or the ROR or the MU. So there is an additional step that you would have to go through. And that's when it comes to the board, and that's when the residents would have a say on, well, but I live next door, and now you're going to change this character from single-family residential to mixed use or something like that. So we give the flexibility that if you have ROR right on the corridor, and if you have a piece of ROR behind you, you can purchase that one and do an urban corridor type of development without any changes. But you have to have the right land use category.
Which is no different than today.
Yes.
You'd still have to do the same thing if you wanted to do something that was more of a corridor-related use further back from the corridor.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Horgan.
Just one quick question, because there's been a lot of conversation about notice. What are the notice requirements for this?
For this particular
For this
action?
particular action today?
In terms of comprehensive plan, it's a comprehensive plan amendment process. It's legislative. We advertise in the newspaper. There's an ad that goes out.
Mr. Chair,
Those ads are included in our package.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, basically, there's several notices. Right now, as Ms. Donaldson pointed out, the transmittal public hearing is advertised, a big local ad in the local section of the paper with a map that shows the streets affected for the urban corridors, and the whole county has to be depicted for the countywide amendments. A similar notice was recently published for the county commission, a big local notice, as opposed to a little legal ad in the back of the paper.
All right.
We don't mail personal notice to each property owner in countywide amendments, because there's hundreds of property owners. We never do.
Yes, ma'am.
And then after it comes back from the state agency review, then another large notice would be in the local section of the paper with the maps and the street names for the adoption public hearing. And informally, not legally required, but Ms. Barrett has educated the public on various workshops and so forth.
Thank
But I'm talking about length of time.
The minimum time is 10 days before, but I think staff exceeds that normally.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, if there's no other questions, we're going to move on to the public comment portion of the hearing. So I've got a couple speaker cards. I'm going to go ahead and call those folks up if you would. This is legislative, so you don't have to be sworn, but if you would step up, state your name, and please make your statement, and you'll have 3 minutes. So the first would be Mr. Brad Latham. If you would, please step forward and state your name.
My name's Brad Latham. Good morning. I'm the president of the Palmasola Park Association, and I represent the proposed urban corridor we've talked about 3 or 4 times, that's on the northern part of Palmasola Park. Palmasola Park, it's roughly 100 years been in existence, and it's weathered a lot of storms. And from the land bust of the 20s, the depressions of the 30s, and the war of the 40s, the urban sprawl of the 50s and 60s, and the rezoning of the 70s and 80s, it's remained a tranquil jewel of a neighborhood with mature trees, flowing sidewalks, and wildlife. And I have a map that will show you where this is at. Can I move these?
Yes, sir, but when you put it up on the overhead, it'll be entered into the public record. You'll have to provide that to the clerk.
Okay.
So,
Okay. The area that we're talking about is right here outlined in pink. That's Palmasola. And our Palmasola, it doesn't come by accident, but it comes by fortitude and perseverance from residents, neighbors, willing to protect the character of Palmasola Park. And today is the day that I exemplify fortitude and ask for your consideration in changing the plans for the urban corridor and exclude the section of Manatee Avenue West from 75th Street to Palmasola Boulevard. As Lisa had said, they went to Palmasola Boulevard just to make it an easy natural border and not put the real numbers in of where that needs to stop. As it is now, there's no businesses on Manatee Avenue West from 75th Street to Palmasola Boulevard. I don't know if they can close it up on that. But outlined in pink there is the area 75th Street to Palmasola Boulevard. There is no business on this section of roadway. There's none. And in the remarks in the background discussion for PA 16-1, Ordinance 1607, Urban Corridor Plan Amendment, it refers to development in decline such as property values, household income levels, and crime, etc. And I understand this, but the third paragraph says the majority focus of the amendment is to improve opportunity for infill, redevelopment, and development along major corridors. It goes on to say it does not include residential subdivisions or existing neighborhoods, just the lands among the major corridors. And I'm here to tell you that this is including a subdivision, an existing neighborhood, Palmasola Park. Currently, the property is in Palmasola Park. There's zoned RS 4.5. Future land use is RES 6. If we take these chains off that she's talking about, you can have businesses come in there. And if you look on this piece of paper, on this here,
Mr. Latham, if you could just wrap it up.
Yep.
Have a few other folks.
It just says that, listen, you don't have to have special permits. You don't have to have applied permits to do business here, that you can just do it. So please end the urban corridor on 75th Street, ensure our character, value, and way of life in Palmasola Park for another 100 years. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right.
All right, thank you.
The next speaker card I have is for Sandy Marshall. If you could, please step forward and state your name. Mr. Marshall, on your card, you wrote that the comment was in regards to the new land development code, and for clarification, we're not considering the land development code today. This is for the comprehensive plan.
Right. Well, it's confusing. Like Mr. Bauer pointed out, he's grew up here all his life. I've lived here 65 years, and I'm 80 years old. I don't expect to live here another 65 years. But I'm here speaking for my kids, my grandkids, your grandkids, and your kids, and everybody else is out here. I watched this county grow from the Braden River. Those of you that know where Marshall's Landing is out there that's been named, I'm one of the Marshalls. I didn't make the money that they made when they bought that, but I was there when it was first put in. I've seen this county grow, so the idea that just because you live out east or you live out west, that we don't want change, that's an incorrect statement. People that have lived here as long as I have recognize that this is a pristine area to live in, and we all want to live here, and that's why we're here today, and that's why you're sitting up there, and that's why I'm standing out here today. I've been a trial lawyer in this county for 50 years, so I've got deep roots in this community all the way up and down the line. I provided a letter to the experts when they had the workshop the other day. Do you have that in your record? Do you have a copy of that letter?
Yes, sir.
Did each one of you receive it?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm not going to go through it because of the time constraints here, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. It speaks for itself, and that's a lot of thought based on experience. That's not just some idle thought coming out of somebody's head that doesn't know what they're talking about. Now, going backwards on this thing, don't rush the judgment on this thing. This idea, like this last gentleman spoke of, this doesn't have to be done because you've got a publication in the paper that says you can't consider anything else. The biggest thing you better consider is do it right the first time. Don't do it wrong 3 and 4 times. Secondly, there should be allowance for amendments. This lady spoke about the school district. I'm very instrumental in what goes on in the school districts around here for a lot of reasons that I won't bore you with. But I'm saying to you this, that you better consider everything that the people that know something that's talking about this come to you and explain it. And we're counting on you. And we are impressed with the quality of what's being done. John, what's your name, John, again? Osborne. When you get as young as I am, you won't remember names either. John's a good man. You got a good man at the helm of this thing. He's come to our organization and spoke. And pay attention, but don't be so quick. Don't get caught up in the legalities of these notices. You can't do this, you can't do that. That's foolish. You people have an obligation to slow it down, make them bring it back before the turkey is cooked. Don't take it out of the oven. The other thing, don't allow developers to fast track through our process. This is wrong. This is why we've got problems today. Just because somebody wants to come here and put up a building or do something else, we don't want Miami or Fort Lauderdale. This is not a developer relief act that we're talking about. I'm not against developers. I know them all, and they're good. Lastly, non-conforming uses. Sounds like you're going to create non-conforming uses like at Palmasola. And also, people should have a right to say what the changes are. Submitting these plans by the developers to our commission, and nobody gets a chance to see them until you have a hearing, that's wrong. The example is Long Bar Point. Remember what happened there? And remember how it turned out, and how we are getting something out of that that makes sense. That's what we need to do. That's what you need to do with what they're trying to propose. The expert's a good expert, but she's used to talking to developers. You need to remember the people out here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And aren't all plans submitted to the county considered public record and available for review, regardless of the condition, the public hearing?
Yes, sir. Every land development application is available for anybody to come in and look at it and get a copy of it even.
Right. So if it's addressed to someone in the county, it's available for review.
Anything that's applied for is available for review. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
John, while you're there, on a timeline basis, I know it's been a while. When did we start this process? You would probably know better than I would, because I've been hearing it for quite a few years that I've been here.
I'm not sure it's ever ended. It goes literally back to the establishment of the 1990 Comprehensive Plan, where we put the policies there saying we recognize this problem with the urban core areas and the redevelopment and infill development because of it's suburban. It was built a little more of an urban situation. Urban as our standards, urban, not like New York kind of urban. And they sort of punted, fix it later. And over time, we have been able to tweak little things. We were able to increase the floor area ratio for hotels, do some things to encourage affordable housing and density bonuses and things like that in different areas. We've did the CRAs. We've been able to do certain things, but the real core of the problem has still been the same. The code and the comp plan still don't do the job of allowing infill and redevelopment in this area, consistent with all these plans that we've done, a stack of them on my desk, and we've never really gone through it and implemented it, to the way those plans envision and the way the board recognized those plans, this board and the Board of County Commissioners. So we've been working through that over the years, but we also, as been working with the Neighborhood Services Department, working in the neighborhoods, been talking to them over the years as well about what they envision for these corridors. Everybody from Bayshore Gardens, and Lisa was at Whitfield not too long ago, and that department, Neighborhood Services, is going to neighborhood association meetings throughout this area, and it's been a constant conversation. But what do you want to see? And their complaints about the way the corridors look today, what the uses are along the corridors, and what they used to be. Because it used to be very different. They used to be the primary places to go, to shop, to work, to live. And now a lot of those just don't look that way anymore. And people want that again. And Pinellas County, for example, I'm not using Pinellas County as a model here. I grew up in Pinellas, but that is not the model. However, they put a lot of money into the same problem. Why aren't we redeveloping? Why aren't things happening? Their new residents were living in Manatee County, in Pasco, and Hillsborough, where they're sprawling out and commuting to Pinellas. So they get the traffic, but not the benefit of people living there with short trips and shopping and things like that. And they discovered, literally like our How We Grow document illustrates, is that you got to provide the necessary land use regulations to provide the incentives for redevelopment. And they explained that too, as many of you who worked in the development business as well, like Paul did, there's a pro forma. There's a business method that you have to do to get the loan, and there's all these things that are involved in that. And redevelopment is very difficult. There are fewer lenders. It's just harder to do. It's harder to make the numbers work. And you have to have the incentives to really make it happen, or we're stuck with really kind of what we have today in many situations, many parts of our county. So I'm sorry, it was a long answer to a short question.
Okay.
Well, it was informative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're still in the public comment portion of the hearing. So the next speaker card I have is Mr. Thomas Denslow. If you could, please step up and state your name, please.
Yes, I'm Thomas Denslow. I'm a sort of a student of urban planning. I'm also an architect in the community. I've lived here for 35 years, and I grew up in Pinellas County in a suburban model. I think the majority of people of my age grew up in suburban models. And I find myself constantly wondering how we're going to get to the next stage, which is maybe a throwback to when cities were being built on a regular basis. And, I think we're collectively all in the same experience. We don't exactly know how it's going to happen. And for the life of me, I find myself saying the same thing all the time. But I have faith that this is going to work. It's worked in the best cities in the world. And it's growth. And how do we do it so that we can sustain culture in the right places and create green spaces where they belong? And by building up in these corridors, it seems like the natural response to creating the intensity where it belongs, and not out in the farmland and not out in the country where we need to preserve that. All the great nations in Europe have discovered that after they've torn down their countries and put them back together for thousands of years. So here we are in the 21st century, and we are now building a city and out of our community. And all these ideas of multimodal destinations where maybe you get out of your car or you ride a bike to one place and you frequent a lot of different shops. This is all wonderful stuff. This is how we get away from our dependence on the automobile. If this is to take effect, I have a client that would like to do a nice hotel on US 41, has the funds to do it, and has wherewithal to make it happen. And we would love to be one of the first projects to work with this new urban corridor initiative. And I just want to tell you how much I support it and how much I believe in it. I don't exactly understand it, but I know the future is good. I'm basically a kind of a person that sees the world as a glass of water half full. And I think the future is bold. And I think there's an opportunity for us to all make our community really, really culturally sustainable. And that's going to help all of us. We'll talk more, we'll develop more ideas about our community, and it just will be a great opportunity for us all. So I highly encourage you to be brave and be bold and let this initiative happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Bauer.
This is a question.
Sure, limited interaction, but.
I'm curious. So you talk about the client that you have that wants to potentially build a hotel
Yeah.
at 41, which I have nothing against. But I'm curious, what about this plan is going to allow him to do that? Is it just going to be cheaper? I mean,
No,
I see the
no.
hotels on 41 all the time, and
Well-
they're vastly empty unless it's seasonal. So just curious, that is it just a matter of being cheaper, or is it something else he's able to build that he can't do now?
Well, one, the time frame. If my client wants to do this right now, it's going to change the zoning and make it fit into the PUD arrangement, which is, as we've just heard, a year worth of public hearings, and that it would fit in that model. But with this new initiative, it would say, look, if you come in, we can make some zoning changes that would help you. The FAR would help us a lot more. Maybe a reduction in parking, which would create more green space on the site, and would be kind of going into this new language of maybe we just don't design everything totally based around the automobile. An automobile, if we stacked all the automobiles that we brought here today, we would fill this whole ground floor. And something's initially wrong with that. And the idea that we can get around without an automobile is in our future, but we just don't know how that's going to happen in Manatee County.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, the next speaker card I have is Mr. Mark Barnaby. If you would please step up, state your name.
Good morning. I am Mark Barnaby. I have not been sworn, which is probably good. I am a native, so I've been here a little while too, about 30 years since I've been sworn, maybe a little longer. I want to talk about TCEAs for a second. First of all, I'm here on behalf of Sarasota Bay Harbor, but who's looking at developing in this area. But I want to talk in more generalities in regard to TCEAs. One of the problems with concurrency, it is horrible for redevelopment. And let me give you an example of that and why you have one of the TCEAs you have, and that is that at the corner of 53rd and US 41, at one time, there were a number of developers that came in there that wanted to redevelop that corner. There was an old mobile home park in there and a couple other things. To redevelop that site, they would have had to 8-lane US 41. The chances of that happening by a single developer, let alone FDOT, was none. And that stymied any redevelopment, which is going to get me to my comment. You are looking at, I think, I agree, a bold opportunity for redevelopment along that corridor, and I think a lot of things here are very good. I would strongly recommend that you apply the TCEA to the properties that are included in this category, because otherwise you're going to have potentially, you're going to stop all that redevelopment. There are a number of segments, and you know, the Palmasola thing, I kind of tend to agree that Palmasola, that area may not be appropriate for that, but I'll let you decide that. But the strip from, for instance, Cortez Road to 53rd is not within a TCA. The strip south of, I think, 69th is not, that area is not within a TCA either. And some of those other areas are not either. And it's going to be very difficult to meet concurrency requirements in those segments of the, and impossible to put those, the improvements that might be necessary for any type of increase in redevelopment of those areas. So I would strongly recommend you look at those particular areas, and if they're part of this project, they probably ought to be a part of a TCEA. But I think you're going in the right direction. I think a lot of the comments were very good, and I think this is something that the county really needs to consider for redevelopment of this area. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. That's all the speaker cards I have, but if there's anybody else in the audience who wishes to speak, step forward and state your name.
Good morning, Planning Commission. David Gustafson. I'm at, I don't have, that's right, I don't have to say I'm sworn. Okay, I apologize. I've been in this community for over 40 years of my life, in the land development world for over 20 years. 6 months ago, I was still running the Bradenton Downtown Development Authority for the city of Bradenton. And my job, our job when we were there, was to redevelop. And I think what you have here in front of you is exactly that. It's a redevelopment opportunity for the areas that really have been forgotten. We have urban sprawl that's, we know is heading out east and constantly heading out east. I grew up in West Bradenton. I used to live on Wares Creek. This is a great opportunity to reinvest into a part of the community that, in my mind, has been forgotten for years. When I lived on Wares Creek, it was a kind of a rough area when I was living there, and all of a sudden I said, you know, I'm gonna make an improvement to that community. So I started, you know, painting my house, putting flowers out, cleaning up, going around and sweeping the streets and doing things. And everybody kept on saying, why are you doing that? I want to help and invest into the community. Before I knew it, I had other neighbors that were doing the exact same thing. I think that is really something that we need to consider. It was bold what the city of Bradenton did with the Riverwalk. Every one of the individuals that I spoke to, and I was the project manager on the Riverwalk, said, how do you know it's going to be successful? And now it is successful. But at that time, I was scared to death, and everybody else was scared. But we were bold, and we had vision. And when I had the newspaper or ABC7 or whatever putting a microphone in front of my face saying, the citizens of this community think you guys are morons for spending $6.2 million, what do they say now? Now they say it's a massive success. I had the same type of individuals that were saying, you're redeveloping the historic Hampton Inn? Are you kidding me? That thing was barely standing. Well, we know it's a success today. This is the exact same scenario in my mind. And I think if you were to turn your back on what the ULI and your planning department and the great work from this consultant, I think that we would be going backwards. We've got to not turn our back on this part of the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to come forward and speak? If you would, please step forward and state your name. Thank you. Good morning.
Morning. My name is Ritesh Shah. And actually, I'm the developer that Mr. Thomas was talking about. I would like to build a hotel. Actually, I currently own a hotel on US 41 on 14th Street. It's a Super 8 hotel. And I've owned it for about a year now. I just recently bought it. And I recently bought a lot on the 14th Street, which is right next to the Quality Inn. And I'm looking to develop a 5-story hotel. So the current regulations are not allowing me to do so, but this initiative will allow me to do so. So I'm strongly in favor of this rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to step forward and provide any public input? Okay, seeing nobody else, we're gonna close the public hearing portion of the hearing and ask, is there any discussion amongst the planning commission? Any clarifications, follow-up with with staff? Mr. Rutledge.
I just had one question. How integrated was your professional analysis with the ULI study that was done? I mean, that's part of the platform from which you kind of started? I mean,
Yeah, that was the first step. We took all the studies that had been prepared, and it was not just the ULI, the character study, the 1B, the how will we grow. We took a look at all those studies, and there is actually a corridor assessment report that we prepared, and it included all that, like a synopsis of all those studies. And there is also in the appendix an analysis of the form-based code that the city of Bradenton prepared, so we could see and compare what we were doing with what was proposed in both.
and if I may, the other thing, when we were in the joint meeting with the commission, I think one of the questions was to do some case study-like work for some of these spots so people could understand it. And I think I kind of raised the question again about doing that along with a cost study. And I was just curious, had that progressed at any point? That, you
No,
know?
we didn't do cost studies, no. It was just the physical, the design.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments, concerns that maybe can be addressed by staff? Anything? I have just what I'm struggling with is we're talking about granting rights, and I like a lot of what we're hearing, but what we haven't really clearly identified or delineated are the restrictions. You know, I think most of the concern comes from the unknown. I don't think we're suggesting that it would be appropriate to build a hotel in a residential neighborhood that currently exists, and I don't know how we can better convey that information. It seems we talk a lot about what's being granted, but maybe we can speak to how things are going to be prohibited or restricted. That's where I'm struggling with this. I've attended quite a few of the workshops, and again, it seems to focus more on what's allowed. So if staff or the consultant could please provide just some clarification on how the process might be restricted for.
There are two items that I would like to address. One, yes, we're opening up the density and the intensity, but like I mentioned before, it's subject to design standards. So we're going to have a section in your land development code that is going to say how you're going to have to design that. Because we don't want just to increase density just because. No, it's going to have to look urban, be pedestrian friendly. The architecture, like when we went to the public workshops, people were saying we're not afraid of heights. What we're afraid of is a big, ugly building popping up on one of these corridors. So we're addressing architecture. We're addressing, placement of windows. We're addressing the location of the parking. So that's going to be in Chapter 9. All those provisions are going to make sure that what you see coming into the area is going to look better than what you have right now. And then the other area is protection of the single-family residential neighborhoods. We have a section that talks about compatibility. So, sure, you can have up to 20 dwelling units per acre or 30. You can have up to 5 stories or 7 or 3, depending, because not everything is going to be 5 or 7. But it says if you are next to a single-family residentially zoned site, there are certain conditions you're going to have to meet. Number one, you're going to have, you cannot go for bonuses. That's one. The other one is you're going to have to set back after your 3rd story, which is what would be allowed now. Now your building is going to have to step back. Now, it doesn't mean that all the buildings are going to be like a wedding cake. They can move the whole building or half of the building, but the idea is that the taller the building gets, the farther away it's going to be from the home. Now, we're not discussing here today if it should be 10 feet or 15 feet or 20 feet. We're going to talk about that when we get into the land development code, but that's the idea, that we're going to ensure compatibility. What other ones do we have for compatibility? We already have in the code things that say you cannot access commercial development from a residential subdivision. You know, it's there already. The table of uses. So we made minimal changes to that table of uses. The main change was that now we're allowing multifamily in the commercial districts, which the GC district is the one that it's going to be mostly used to implement the ROR. In that district now, you're going to be able to do multifamily residential. We looked at, somebody mentioned the nonconformities. Right now, the code allows single-family homes within these districts. And originally, we wanted to get rid of that because you don't want a single-family home popping up on 14th Street. But, you know, we talked with the county attorney's office, and we understand we don't want to create nonconformities in that sense. We don't want to take that right away from somebody who may have purchased a lot to do a single-family home. So we made changes in the other direction, adding some uses. Now, something else is that not everything is going to be by right. Not everything is going to be approved administratively. If you remember your table of uses in the code, it says whether the use is permitted by right or if it requires a special permit or administrative permit. That didn't change that much because even though this is the area where we want to encourage a mix of uses, there are some uses that are still not adequate for this area. So we still have that type of review. Some uses may have to go to the hearing officer anyway. So there are going to be a lot more provisions like you're talking about when we get into the land development code.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just
Ms.
along
Shank.
your comments, you mentioned the word conferring rights. By voting on this item today, you're not conferring any development rights. This is only recommending a transmittal, that the board transmit the proposed amendments to all the various, there's 12 state agencies that have to review, prepare reports. Then it comes back for adoption. And we were careful going through this, and the consultant in the first draft might have missed one or two. We went through this, and every footnote says density bonuses and FAR bonuses are subject to, you know, the design standards that Pat mentioned in the Land Development Code.
Okay.
So we've been careful to qualify it when it's referenced.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Horrigan.
So what happens if this is approved before the LDC changes or amendments are in place, and someone comes in the very next day and applies for whatever this has granted them?
They can't do anything unless they have the zoning. So even though it's in the comprehensive plan, it's not in the land development code. So they have to go by whatever the zoning district says. So let's say somebody wants to come in and do commercial on the ground floor and multifamily above, and they have a GC zoning district. Well, sorry, residential is not allowed. You're going to have to wait until the code amendments are in place so that you can do that. So there's going to be a waiting period between now and that time. Now, they can still come and do the plan development or whatever tools they have now to try to get there.
But is it not true that the zoning must follow the comprehensive plan by law? That's been
Correct. We
federally
have,
adjudicated?
under the state statute, we have 1 year to amend the LDC to be in conformance with the comprehensive plan. There has to be a lag time because if these comprehensive plan amendments are adopted by the board in 3 or 4 months, there's a 31-day window where a legal challenge can be filed. Anyone can file a legal challenge, and it stops the effective date of the comp plan amendments. We have to wait and go through our administrative hearing process with a state hearing officer. So we can't do the LDC because it has to be consistent with the currently adopted comp plan that's in effect until we get that effective date nailed down for the comp plan amendments.
And the fact that we're
Can't
not.
do them simultaneously. We just can't.
The fact that we're not removing any rights in this amendment to the comprehensive plan doesn't create a problem with the land development code. Those rights still exist, so you can carry those into the zoning, the rezoning. Is that?
That's
yeah?
correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Mr. Chairman, I did
Ms. Shank?
see the comment letter and the update memo we received, and there was an issue raised about we need to have language in the Land Development Code about citizens not having to pay legal fees if they challenge a rezoning application. We can't address that matter. That's who pays attorney's fees is addressed by state statute, and legal lawsuits and judges decide that. And there was a comment made about enforceable noise ordinance, and the county commission is holding a workshop on the noise ordinance on August 16th at 1:30 PM as a proposed ordinance, and there are amendments being proposed. And we do have an existing noise ordinance until those are adopted.
In the,
I just wanted to state that because it was raised in the comments.
okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, anything else? Ms. Barrett?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify with Mr. Latham's concerns. I did speak to him before the hearings, and I'll get with Pat, and we'll look at reducing the corridor down to 75th prior to board.
Okay, does that,
Hear that. Say that again,
We'll look at reducing the corridor, stopping at 75th for Manatee Avenue, so as not to affect the area of Palmasola, where they have their concerns.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
have you all considered any other areas that's much like 75th Street in Palmasola? I mean, has that been analyzed are there any suggested potential problems? I know you want to have something that's nice and easy and broad and just easy to do, but had it not been for Mr. Latham to come in here today to identify this issue, how many other issues are out there along, I mean, I get it. Again, like 41, 15th Street East, those areas, I get it. But, Cortez, 53rd, Manatee Avenue, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other areas, but has that been analyzed?
We did, specifically the area in front of Whitfield. We did not include some of the future land use categories that included the OL and OM along 41, because that was a concern that was raised from the Whitfield community.
Okay.
And again, really the changes looking at the Palmasola area, it is residential, but based on their existing future land use categories and their zoning districts, these amendments would not really specifically apply to that area unless someone came in with a rezone or a plan amendment, which are public hearings. So it would not be, if these amendments are approved, an outright change. They would have to go through the rezone and the plan amendment process to utilize these urban corridor changes.
But it would be nice to make it nice and clean and not to have these folks to have to come and battle and request something that they shouldn't have to worry about.
Well, let me clarify too, though, that area of Manatee Avenue and 75th right now meets commercial locational criteria, and even by today's standards, some neighborhood retail is potentially permitted within those zoning districts. I mean, a few years ago, they did have a rezone process on that area to rezone to office.
I get it, but if they're included in this, things are a whole lot easier and their fight is a whole lot bigger,
I understand.
right? Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question with regard to the information you provided. Does that change the, any motion for consideration on these items? The fact that one of the maps might be revised?
It would be a revision to map M, but I believe we could just look at that, revising that prior to board.
Well, I wanted to clarify, if the Plan Commission has a desire to exclude that portion along Manatee Avenue, you can include that in your motion to exclude it.
Okay.
Or you can recommend approval with the maps as is. It's up to
Okay.
you.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay, the board seems to be beat this horse to death, so.
Can I just say that I have worked in several cities where they have these core redevelopment programs, and in Castleberry, we worked on it for almost 4 years to get it cut up because they don't have a plan. We accomplished it, but it was bloody and painful, and only because I was tied to the community did I care to do it. I think, and to the counselor's comments, I think things done right are very attractive. People like them. I don't think this is designed to do it poorly or overly quickly. I'm a big supporter of redevelopment because I think people want to live in cities. We see that all the time. Apartment dwellers, almost 70% want to know where the retail is to their apartment. So I just see this as what we want to do. If it's imperfect, perhaps, but it is certainly the right direction as opposed to having another gas station and another, and nothing against gas stations, but maybe there's some other things we could do. So I like it very much.
Thank you. All right, the chair will entertain a motion.
And Mr. Chair, then the first motion pertains to
Oh, yes.
item
Item number
5,
5.
which is the Urban Corridor Plan Amendment, PA 1601.
Yes. All right, the chair will entertain a motion on item number 5.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Delesline.
based upon the evidence presented, comments made at the public hearing, the technical support documents, and finding the request to be consistent with the Community Planning Act as codified in applicable portions of Chapter 163, Part 2, Florida statute, and the Manatee County Comprehensive Plan, I move to recommend transmittal of the plan amendment PA-16-01 as recommended by staff.
Thank you, Mr. Delesline. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Deliberation, Mr. Rutledge.
I have a question of whether this motion is the appropriate time to make the carve-out recommendation.
Item number 5 includes map M, I believe.
Yes, this is the time to decide that.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there discussion? Mr. Rutledge, are you suggesting that?
I was curious whether Commissioner Bauer would want to make it at this time.
Quite honestly, I would remove everything on Cortez Road and Manatee Avenue from 34th Street out to the island. That would be what I'd be comfortable in approving today.
Okay, Mr. Rhodes.
Mr. Chairman, I understand the exclusions all are part of it from what we're saying, but I don't feel that I know enough about the areas to exclude them at this point. So I'm in favor of them keeping them. Staff did say they're gonna work with individuals and maybe look at this and make some modification, but I don't feel I know enough about it, based on what they said about current, what's allowed there or what needs to be done, to say that I'd be favor of it only if it was excluded.
Thank you. So your opinion is it still needs to be reevaluated?
But I don't want it as an exclusion to a approval process.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Horrigan.
Yeah, I would take the contrary position to that, that I think that what we're doing is we're recommending something to the Porter County Commissioners. They will make their determination, but I would be in favor of this if it had the carve-out of that area from 75th to Palmasola. But with that in there, I'm very uncomfortable with what it's doing to that, that neighborhood. That's my comment.
Thank you. Any other deliberation on this matter? Mr. Rutledge.
May I ask the council, would it have any impact if we make that recommendation?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, process would be.
Within the
you would-
purview of the Planning Commission to consider that.
Right. Process is you would make a recommendation to amend the motion, and I think
Yeah.
it would have to be agreed on. Who made the motion? I'm sorry. Mr. Delesline, and then that recommendation to amend would have to be seconded.
Okay.
So,
Or else you just vote on the primary motion, see what happens, and if it fails, you can make another motion.
May I just comment, it would be my preference to ask Mr. Bauer to describe how he would see that being so knowledgeable. I'm not as knowledgeable, I agree, but I would defer to his analysis of it and his recommendation for a motion if he were to make one.
Mr. Rutledge, I would, if I were to make the motion, I would make the motion amending the approval to remove the urban corridors of Cortez Road and Manatee Avenue from 34th Street west.
34th, not 75th.
Correct.
Oh.
That would be my motion. However, of course, it's not a loss per se if you were to approve a motion removing that corridor between 75th Street and Palmasola Bay, because the Board of County Commissioners are going to hear what I have to say, and they can either choose to listen or not listen. So I will vote no, only on the basis that I want more, but not that I think you are wrong by doing that with the 75th Street. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
I would ask
Corey.
Mr. Delesline if he would consider amending his motion to remove that section from 75th out to Palmasola.
They're already arranging it anyway. I don't see what difference it makes one way or the other. The staff's already meeting with it to get that knocked out of the map anyway.
I think it makes a big difference to the Board of County Commissioners to make sure that they hear us.
I would amend it from 75th to Palmasola Boulevard.
To be clear, you're amending the map M
Yes,
to
sir.
remove the portion from 75th west.
Yes, yes.
Motion, and I'm sorry, who seconded?
I'd second it.
Yes.
I'll amend my second.
Okay, so we have an amended motion and an amended second. Mr. Rutledge.
And
further
may I
deliberation.
ask the commissioners questions? So would you say that there's a fairly good argument that that's a very pristine area from 75th to the water?
110%.
Okay. So I
There's
think
no
that, okay, so I'm comfortable with that, thanks.
Thank you.
I only fish there once, so I don't know.
So first you vote on the amended motion.
Okay.
If you're gonna,
We, on the amendment,
yeah.
okay, we're voting on only the amendment, not the actual motion. So those in favor of the amendment, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. The amendment is approved, accepted.
Okay, then you vote on the main motion, and the main motion includes the modification of map M to exclude from the urban corridor map that portion of Manatee Avenue located west of 75th Street West. Right?
Okay,
Fine.
yes. And then for further deliberation, I think there's a lot of uncertainty here in this process. I think there's an opportunity, but it's somewhat hard to identify. I understand the intent, and I'm optimistic that it provides a benefit, but that's my opinion. Is there anybody else who wishes to provide any information before calling the matter to vote?
I would only encourage that they resolve the issue with the school district.
Right, that's a separate matter. That's an interlocal agreement, and it's not, I don't even think that falls under the purview of the planning commission.
It'll probably come back in a future consideration.
Thank you. All right, Chair's going to call the matter to vote. All those in favor of the amended motion, or, I'm sorry, the amended motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign.
I'm a nay. Again, I just want to clarify, I like the amendment. I want more.
Understood.
That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Chair votes aye, passes 6-1. Thank you. So we'll now consider item number 6. Chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Delesline.
based upon the evidence presented, comments made at the public hearing, the technical support documents and finding the request to be consistent with the Community Planning Act as codified, as applicable portions of the chapters 163, Part 2, Florida statutes, and the Manatee County Comprehensive Plan, I move to recommend transmittal of PA 1603 as recommended by staff.
Thank you. I have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Rhodes, second. Any deliberation on this matter? Chair will call the item to a vote. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign.
Nay.
Mr. Bauer? Chair votes aye. The matter passes 6-1. So, is there any additional business?
I'd like to say one thing to, is it Mr. Bradley? Thank you very much for coming and making the presentation to us. It was very helpful to me, and I think the insight that you brought in the conversation that it incurred was valuable. And I know sometimes coming here seems a little, what's accomplished, but for me, it was very helpful. I think it changed what we decided, and so I commend you for spending your morning here with us. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other matters before we close the meeting?